starts with the hero Vermouth and his 4 comrades, and they traveled into the demon world to take down the Demon King. They were incredibly strong. They had already defeated 3 of the 5 Demon Kings, with only 2 left to go. The path was anything but easy. They fought through endless waves of demons. The demon world was crawling with them. An entire army stood in their way, but Vermouth never backed down. His eyes were fixed on the enemy. He unleashed a powerful attack, his glowing blade cutting right through the darkness. Every single one of them was a monster in their own right. Their attacks lit up the entire battlefield. And then there was Hamel. He was always the loudest, always causing the biggest explosions. And then there was Vermouth. He was the hero, the one everyone looked up to. Hamel hated him for it because he was just that good. They were deep inside the demon world, facing down a swarm of monsters. But Sienna wasn't intimidated. She ran straight for them. She just laughed, yelling that a huge army was nothing against her magic. She raised her staff, and it lit up with incredible power. A blast of fire and ice erupted from her, tearing through the demon ranks. That was Sienna the Wise, the greatest mage in history. But Sienna wasn't the only one. Another member of their party, Anise, was preparing her own attack. Anise called out that she would bless everyone, and a bright, holy light exploded from her. A demon saw an opening and lunged straight for her, but her blessing wasn't what you'd expect. She met the demon with a crushing blow from her mace. That was Anise the Faithful. She had her own way of saving people. Just then, another hero joined the fight. It was Molon, the giant warrior of their group. He let out a huge roar, swinging his massive axe. His one swing tore through dozens of flying demons at once. He just stood there, covered in the mess, ready for more. And that was Molon the Brave. Then there was the last one, Hamel. He was always trying to get ahead of their leader, Vermouth. He was furious, yelling at Vermouth for trying to leave him in the dust. He didn't wait for anyone, just charged straight into the horde of demons. He screamed at them to get out of his way. His blade was a blur, cutting down everything in his path. He wasn't known for being wise or brave. They called him Hamel the Stupid. After the fight, he just stood there, looking like it was all just an annoyance to him. The thing is, Hamel was always jealous of Vermouth. He saw Vermouth as his one true rival, but nobody else in the group really saw it that way. After clearing out a bunch of demons, Hamel thought they were done with the small stuff. But then, he saw Vermouth charging ahead without him, and he just lost it. A flash of blue light shot past him. Vermouth had already moved on to the next target. His attack sliced right through a massive demon that Hamel hadn't even noticed. The creature grunted and collapsed. Once again, Hamel was left watching from the sidelines. But there was another enemy, one much stronger than the others. Before anyone could react, the demon's attack went straight through Hamel's chest. He collapsed to the ground. Vermouth could only watch, frozen for a second. The demon just laughed, enjoying what it had done. It wasn't finished either. A blast of energy shot from its hand, aimed right at them. That's when Vermouth finally moved, unleashing one of his skills. His sword lit up, sending a huge wave of power to meet the demon's blast head on. The 2 blasts of energy met, and Vermouth's power just sliced right through the demon. His attack was so fast, it was over in an instant. Sienna, Anise, and Molon could only scream his name as they ran towards him, but it was too late. They gathered around his body, and Vermouth just stood there, watching. He looked down at his friend, his voice full of regret, telling him there was no reason for him to die like this. Hamel just smiled, saying it was an honorable death. In his last moments, he regretted not being more honest with his friends. With his last bit of strength, he reached for Vermouth and made him promise to defeat the Demon Kings. Vermouth grabbed his hand tightly. He swore on his name as a hero that he would finish what they started. Even as he was dying, Hamel managed a small smile. He looked to Anise and asked her to pray for him. He turned to Molon, telling him he was a braver warrior than anyone he knew. And finally, he spoke to a heartbroken Sienna. With his last breath, he started to tell her that he loved her. Except that's not what happened at all. A young boy threw a book down, screaming that he never said anything like that. Turns out, he was just reading a story about his own past life. He was absolutely furious. He couldn't believe what was written, wondering what kind of person wrote this garbage. If he could find the author, he'd beat them up right now. The book was supposed to be about the great heroes, but while everyone else was called great, wise, or brave, they had called him Stupid Hamel. He was sure it was written by some loser he beat up 300 years ago. He couldn't understand why his old friends, Vermouth, Sienna, Anise, and Molon, would let a book like this exist. He wondered why they never tried to protect his honor, but then he calmed down. He guessed he couldn't really blame them. They had no way of knowing he'd come back with all his memories. His name was Hamel. He died 300 years ago while fighting the Demon Kings, and now he was back. He looked up at the portrait hanging on the wall. He had been reincarnated as a descendant of his old rival, the hero Vermouth, the one person he could never stand. Turns out, in his past life, Vermouth had a lot of women besides his wife. Back then, Vermouth never seemed to care about women, but Eugene figured that must have changed as he got older. After all, he was only human. This whole family system was a mess. Only the kids from the main wife were considered the direct line, collateral line, basically the less important relatives. The rules were completely stacked against them. Kids from the collateral lines weren't even allowed to use real swords or train their mana until after a big family ceremony. So he'd been stuck training with a wooden sword this whole time, but that was about to change. Today was the day. Even with just a wooden stick, his movements were were incredibly fast and powerful. The sword cut through the air with so much force, it looked like a real blade. He swung, and the training dummy just exploded into pieces. His practice was done. He looked down at what was left of the training dummy. It was completely destroyed. His father was watching from the side, looking absolutely terrified. Eugene just looked back at him, casually mentioning that the dummy broke again. He turned to face his dad. His father stared at him, really taking in his son's body. He was built like a grown man. He thought to himself that even though Eugene was only 13, he would probably lose if they fought barehanded. His father finally said it out loud. He told Eugene that he was scary sometimes, that his tone and his fierce gaze didn't belong to a child. He even brought up how Eugene never mourned his mother, even though he lost her when he was so young. But Eugene didn't seem to notice his father's concern. He just kicked the broken wood and blamed the blacksmith, saying his skills were trash. He thought they should drag the man here and punish him for selling a bad product, but then added that his father was too merciful for that. His father just sighed and agreed to warn him. Then, his father brought up something important. The bloodline continuation ceremony was tomorrow. The bloodline continuation ceremony. In Eugene's mind, it was a completely ridiculous tradition. Every 10 years, the family gathered all the kids between 10 and 15 from both the main house and the side branches. They were all brought together to compete and prove they were worthy of being called a Lionheart. But the whole thing was rigged. The kids from the direct line could train with real swords and develop their mana. It was just a way for the main family to keep the collateral lines in check from a young age. His father looked at the shattered dummy. He thought to himself that Eugene's talent was so incredible. He sometimes wondered if he was even his real son, if only he'd been born into the direct line. But then he thought maybe it would have been better if Eugene had no talent at all, just like him. At least then, he wouldn't have to suffer, knowing how much better he was than the kids who had everything. Eugene noticed the sad look on his face and asked what was wrong. His father just waved it off, saying it was nothing. But Eugene knew that wasn't true. He could tell his father was just hating himself for being talentless. His father put a hand on his shoulder, his expression serious. He warned Eugene not to even try competing with the children from the direct line. He said no matter how talented Eugene was, he couldn't win against kids who had been training with mana and real weapons their whole lives. Eugene just smiled and promised he wouldn't. But inside, he was thinking the exact opposite. To him, this was just a contest against a bunch of 10-year-old kids. The whole idea was so boring, it made him want to. He just stood there, staring at the training dummy. His father's words were still hanging in the air. His father explained the details of the upcoming ceremony. There would be 3 children from the direct line and 6 from the collateral lines, all competing against each other. Eugene already knew who he was up against, the son of the first wife and the twins from the second. As for the other kids from the collateral line, he figured they were probably trash. He didn't need to say anything else. He just raised his sword. With a single, powerful swing, he completely obliterated the training dummy. A fierce grin spread across his face. He couldn't wait to see just how well the descendants of the Great Vermouth had turned out. The day finally came. A carriage arrived to take him to the main family's estate. As he rode along, he thought back to his previous life. Back when he was Hamel, he always believed he was a genius. He always picked up new things faster than anyone else and grew stronger at an incredible rate. But there was one person who didn't see it that way. He remembered getting into a heated argument, demanding to know what was just said to him. It was Vermouth. He told Hamel he was pitiful and that he could have been so much stronger if he just tried a little harder. Hamel couldn't believe what he was hearing. He screamed back that he was already trying as hard as he possibly could. He told Vermouth that not everyone could be a genius like him. But looking back now, he knew the truth. He wasn't the real genius. The true genius was Vermouth. He was a master of both sword and magic, known as the God of War. He was on a completely different level. Vermouth was a duke in his home empire. He was praised as a hero until the very end. He sat there, thinking about what happened to the rest of his old friends. Sienna, the wise. She was invited to the magic kingdom of Arath and became the youngest head wizard of a magic tower. Then there was Anise, the faithful. She was called a saintess, and people even wrote holy books about her teachings. And Mullen, the brave. Unbelievably, that big idiot somehow managed to create his own kingdom. It sounded like everyone lived a pretty good life after he was gone. But if that was true, then why were the Demon Kings still alive? They had all promised to defeat the Demon Kings, and he remembered Vermouth swearing on his life to finish the job. He remembered dying at the castle of the Demon King of Incarceration. After he was gone, Vermouth made some kind of promise with that very same Demon King. That promise was the reason the war ended. The world became peaceful, and it stayed that way for the next 300 years. He was on his way to the main house of the Lionheart family. The man sitting across from him noticed his serious expression and thought he was nervous. He smiled, looking at Eugene with a friendly face. He warned Eugene that if he was this nervous now, living in the main house would be very difficult. Eugene just smiled back and thanked the man, Sir Gordon, for his advice. A moment later, the carriage passed a boundary. They were now on land owned exclusively by the Lionhearts. Gordon laughed, telling Eugene they still had a long way to go before reaching the main mansion. Eugene just shot back, asking why the man was so proud of land that didn't even belong to him. Eugene wondered if having so much land was just inconvenient, but Gordon explained that they had warp gates all over the property, so getting around was no problem. So Eugene asked the obvious question, why were they in a carriage? Gordon just smiled, telling him it was because he hadn't been given permission to use the warp gates yet. Eugene just leaned back, a small smile on his face. So the carriage continued on, making its way through the massive estate. Finally, they arrived. Gordon stepped out and gestured grandly, welcoming Eugene to the main estate of the Lionhearts. Eugene stepped out of the carriage, his eyes fixed on the home of his old rival. This was it. This was where it all began. As they walked through the massive gates, Eugene took in the sheer scale of the place. He smirked, sarcastically thinking about the welcoming ceremony he was sure was waiting for him. They walked down a long path lined with flags, heading toward the main building. The place was huge. Every flag bore the same symbol, Vermouth's golden lion. He glanced down at his own chest. He knew only the direct descendants were allowed to wear that lion emblem. Eugene asked if any of his other relatives had arrived yet. Gordon explained that he was the very first one here and offered to show him to the guest house. They arrived at a large, fancy-looking guest house. A maid bowed politely. She introduced herself as Nina and said she'd be serving him during his stay. Nina handed him a small bell, explaining that he should ring it if he needed anything. Eugene looked her over. So, they were at least giving him a personal servant. He sat down on the bed and asked how old she was. Nina told him she was 16 and had just finished her training. A smirk crossed his face. He immediately understood their game. They assigned him a brand new maid, so if she made a mistake and he got angry, they'd have an excuse to discipline him. They were really trying to find any reason to put him in his place. He changed the subject, asking when his relatives would arrive. Nina told him they'd be there in 4 days at the latest. With that, he got up from the bed. He told her to show him to the training gym. Nina was completely confused by the request. She led him out of the guest house and into the courtyard. Meanwhile, 2 other kids were talking about the new arrival. A young boy tried to remember Eugene's name. His sister, Ciel, reminded him. She added that Eugene was the same age as them. Cyan scoffed. He mocked Eugene for being from the countryside, joking that he was probably better with a pitchfork than a sword. He plugged his nose, saying Eugene's carriage probably stank. He decided that even as a relative, Eugene should be punished for bringing that smell onto their property. Ciel lit up, completely agreeing with her brother. She was excited about the idea of going to punish him. Cyan corrected her, pretending to be more mature. He claimed they weren't punishing Eugene, just giving him a friendly warning. Ciel just thought he was being too nice. From a window, another boy watched the twins head out into the garden. Down below, Eugene was walking with Nina, with no idea that trouble was heading straight for him. Ciel's eyes were sharp. She was ready to go meet this new relative. The older brother, Eward, watched them from his window, looking a little shocked. Down below, Ciel walked through the garden, heading for the courtyard. She glanced back with a grin. This was going to be fun. But Eugene wasn't just sitting around. He'd found a training spear and was already practicing in the courtyard. And he wasn't just messing around. His form was perfect. He moved with a speed and power that was unbelievable for a kid his age. Every single move was sharp and clean. He was on a completely different level. He'd always trained hard, even in his past life as Hamel. But now, he was pushing this new body to its absolute extreme. His grip was tight, his eyes focused. The crazy thing was, no matter how hard he pushed, his body just took it. Even small injuries would heal almost instantly. He could feel the power surging through him. He spun the spear, kicking up dust and wind with every move. A huge grin spread across his face. This body, Vermouth's bloodline. It was better than he ever could have imagined. He put all his strength into one final thrust. He was moving so fast, it looked like there were 3 of him at once. A maid watched from a distance, completely captivated. She couldn't believe it. He was moving with such power, even with heavy sandbags tied to his arms, and the spear itself. Suddenly, a voice from behind her broke the silence. She turned around to see 2 kids from the main family, Cyan and Ciel Lionheart. Cyan looked annoyed and demanded to know what Eugene was doing. The maid was terrified, stammering their names and asking what brought them here. But Cyan wasn't interested in small talk. He pointed right past her and repeated his question impatiently. That's when the sound of the spear stopped. Eugene stood there, holding his weapon. He looked over and gave the most obvious answer possible. He was swinging a spear. Without even looking at him, Eugene just called him an idiot. Ciel couldn't help but laugh, pointing out that the country kid had just called him an idiot. That was it. Cyan's face turned red with fury. He clenched his fists and screamed for Eugene to apologize immediately. Eugene just glanced over his shoulder and said he was sorry, without a hint of emotion. Cyan was speechless. He didn't know how to react to that. He snapped out of it and started yelling again, telling Eugene he wasn't being sincere and needed to bow his head properly. Eugene just shrugged. He pointed out that if they were the same age, then they were friends, and friends don't need to bow to each other. Cyan scoffed at the idea of being friends. He yelled that just because they were both Lionhearts, it didn't make them equals. Ciel whispered something to her brother, reminding him about the carriage. A nasty idea popped into Cyan's head. He pointed at Eugene and ordered him to clean the carriage he came in. He even insulted him, saying he probably smelled like a farm. Eugene just stared back, not even blinking. He looked completely bored by the whole thing. He turned his attention away from the twins and called over to a maid named Nina. He asked if she was his servant, and she nervously confirmed it. So he pointed to the carriage and told her to go clean it. The maids were completely confused by the order. Ciel just smirked, enjoying the chaos. Cyan completely lost it. He screamed at Eugene, asking why he was passing the job off to a maid when he was the one who was supposed to do it. He screamed at Eugene, demanding to know why he was being ignored. He yelled his name, Cyan Lionheart, as if that alone should command respect. Eugene wasn't bothered at all. He just smiled, introduced himself, and casually suggested they get along. While Cyan fumed in the background, his sister Ciel gave a friendly wave and introduced herself. But Cyan shot down the idea immediately. He snarled that he had no intention of getting along with someone who had disrespected him. That's when he saw a wooden practice sword lying on the ground. Without a second thought, he snatched it up. His anger exploded. He yelled that Eugene had humiliated him and then officially challenged him to a duel. Cyan screamed at the top of his lungs, officially declaring it a duel. Eugene just looked at him with a little smile. He thought the whole thing was a joke. He told Cyan that you can't just throw around the word duel so easily. Eugene was clearly getting tired of this, but Cyan just saw it as fear and kept pushing, asking if he was scared. That's when Eugene's expression changed. He wasn't smiling anymore. Thinking he had him cornered, Cyan mocked him for being scared. He demanded that if Eugene was too afraid to fight, he should just bow his head and apologize. But Eugene stayed perfectly calm. He explained that he wasn't afraid. He just had no interest in dueling him, and he definitely wasn't going to apologize. Cyan completely lost it. He accused Eugene of being a coward, who just kept running away. Then he crossed a line, saying it seemed like his parents never taught him about honor. The insult about his parents was the last straw. Without a word, Eugene let the heavy training weights fall from his arms. They hit the ground with enough force to crack the earth. Cyan stared, completely stunned by the impact. Eugene just calmly started taking off the weights on his wrist and looked up. He told Cyan he would accept the duel. His eyes were intense. He tossed the weights aside like they were nothing. Then he started taking off his weighted training vest. He was getting ready to fight for real. It landed with a heavy thud, kicking up another cloud of dust. Cyan and Ciel just watched, completely stunned. That's when it finally hit Cyan. He realized Eugene had been training with those incredibly heavy weights the entire time. He'd always thought they were just props to make him look tough. Eugene knelt down and picked up the wooden spear. The time for talking was over. Cyan was sweating. He knew he'd started this, and if he backed out now, his sister Ciel would never let him live it down. He steeled himself. The only way to get his honor back was to win. He threw a red cloth forward and yelled Eugene's name, officially requesting a duel. The challenge landed right in front of Eugene. He looked up, his eyes cold. He accepted the challenge without hesitation. Ciel's eyes went wide. She couldn't believe this was actually happening. The duel was over before it even began. Cyan leaped forward to strike, but Eugene was faster. He shot up from the ground and slammed the spear right into Cyan's stomach. The blow was devastating. Cyan couldn't even breathe. Eugene just held his ground, his expression unchanged. Cyan went flying backward, the wooden sword he was holding completely shattering from the force of the blow. Eugene stood there, perfectly calm. He just stated that he had won. Ciel rushed over to her brother, frantically asking if he was all right, but Cyan couldn't even answer. He was clutching his stomach, gasping for air. A second later, he threw up right there on the ground. Ciel watched, horrified. Her worry for her brother instantly turned to rage. She spun around to face Eugene. She started yelling at him, claiming the duel was unfair and dishonorable. Eugene didn't even seem bothered. He just crossed his arms and explained that the duel started the moment the handkerchief was thrown. It was Cyan's own fault for being careless. Ciel pointed right at him. Her eyes narrowed. She accused him of having trained in mana. Eugene calmly explained that he hadn't. The collateral family wasn't allowed to train in mana before the main family. But Ciel called him a liar, insisting there was no way he could swing that heavy spear without it. She added that his attack was so fast, her brother wouldn't have been able to react, even if he'd been paying attention. Eugene just let out a little smirk. He looked at her with a smug grin, telling her she had good eyes. Ciel pointed out how rude his speaking habits were. Eugene just smiled, admitting it wasn't the first time he'd heard that. Then he gave her brother some credit. He explained that Cyan hadn't just been beaten. The moment the spear hit, he instinctively jumped back to lessen the impact. For someone with no real fighting experience, that was impressive. He said that with that potential, Cyan might have a chance to grow. But then he finished by saying that for a descendant of the Great Vermouth, he was still basically trash. Cyan struggled to stand, shaking with rage. He couldn't believe Eugene had actually dared to strike him. He choked out that it was a cheap shot. Completely humiliated, Eugene just grinned. He pointed out that for twins, he and his sister sure said the same things. He slowly walked towards his brother, who was still trying to recover. Then he got right in his face. He told Cyan that if he was so proud of being from the main family, he should have the honor to admit when he's lost. Cyan just gritted his teeth, completely speechless. For the first time, Eugene started to wonder if he'd gone too far. He'd just taken down a kid from the main family, and he realized there would probably be consequences. That's when an attendant came rushing out, yelling for the young master. The trouble was just getting started. The man who arrived looked serious. He'd clearly seen everything that just happened. Eugene looked the man over. He didn't have the Lionheart emblem, but Eugene could tell he was skilled. Cyan looked up, his face a total mess. He recognized the man and weakly called out his name, Hazar. Hazar helped him up, and Cyan just collapsed against him. He cried that he'd lost to a kid from the countryside. He admitted that he was the one who demanded the duel, and he'd lost it completely. Hazar listened quietly, taking it all in. A duel. This was more serious than just a kid's fight. The two of them stood there, facing Eugene. The fight was over. but the tension was thicker than ever. With Cyan steadied, the man finally turned to Eugene. He introduced himself as Hazar, the one in charge of guiding the young master. Eugene calmly introduced himself as Eugene Lionheart from Geidel province. Hazar immediately recognized the name of the province. He realized Eugene must be Sir Gerhard's son, and Eugene confirmed it. The man looked at the scene with a serious expression and asked what exactly had happened. Eugene didn't hesitate. He explained that Cyan provoked him first and had insulted his father. Cyan immediately tried to deny it. He yelled that Eugene had called him a coward for asking if he'd learned any honor from his father. Eugene's eyes narrowed. He repeated that Cyan had insulted both him and his father, then asked Hazar if there was any good reason he should have refused the duel. Hazar looked completely stressed out. He covered his mouth for a moment before admitting that Eugene's reason was acceptable. With that settled, he told Cyan to go get his injuries treated and started to lead him away. Hazar told Eugene they'd meet again. Ciel gave a cheerful wave goodbye as her brother was dragged away. Eugene just waved back, looking completely unbothered. After all that excitement, he was starving. He sat down to a huge meal and just started eating. A maid named Nina approached him while he was eating. He looked up and asked if she'd found the information he wanted. She confirmed she had. She reported that several other young masters and ladies were arriving. Deacon, Hansen, and Juice would be there by noon tomorrow. Then Gargus and Desara would arrive in the evening through a warp gate. Eugene took a bite, thinking it over. They were all gathering faster than he expected. The bloodline continuation ceremony was about to begin. With his meal finished, he headed outside. He stood on a bridge, looking out at the massive estate built by his old rival. All of this was Vermouth's legacy. He looked up as if talking directly to Vermouth. He promised that he was going to screw over his descendants, and that Vermouth shouldn't be too upset about it. He clenched his fist. After all, he never asked to be reborn as his rival's descendant. But a grin spread across his face. He was done being angry about this reincarnation. Now he was going to use it. Meanwhile, Cyan, Ciel, and Hazar were called into a grand room. They stood before a woman who was clearly in charge. The woman looked at her son, her voice dangerously quiet. She asked if it was really true that her son, Cyan, had challenged someone from a lesser family branch and lost. Hazar confirmed it. The woman was Anasilia, the second wife of the main family. A smile spread across her face, but it wasn't a kind one. She told Cyan to come closer. He walked toward her, looking terrified. Without warning, she jabbed him hard in the chest with her fan. She pushed harder, asking if he'd really lost in a single strike. Cyan cried out that she was hurting him. She told him to stay still, her voice like ice. With her son pinned, she turned her attention to Hazar. She asked if he was absolutely certain that Eugene had never trained to use his mana. Hazar confirmed it. He reported that Eugene, Sir Gerhard's son, had no trace of mana in his body. Still not understanding, Anasilia turned to her daughter, Ciel. She demanded to know exactly how her brother lost. Ciel explained that Eugene thrust his spear the moment the fight began. Her brother was surprised and tried to back away, but Eugene's attack was just too fast. So that was it. The fight really had ended with a single strike. Cyan couldn't even look at her. He stammered her name, absolutely terrified of what she was going to do next. She slapped him hard right across the face. She screamed at him, furious that he lost a duel in front of servants. But what made it worse was that he lost to a boy who had never even trained with mana. She was terrified of what she'd have to tell his father when he returned. His failure would bring shame on them, and she knew her rival, the Onus, would never let her hear the end of it. Cyan just cried, apologizing to his mother over and over again. Her anger wasn't just for her son. She turned to the instructor, Hazar, and called his name. She told Hazar that if it weren't for her husband, she would kill him right there. Instead, she gave him a new order: train Cyan, so he would never shame her again. Hazar agreed immediately. Anasilia simply told him to take Cyan and leave. Hazar put a hand on the boy's shoulder and led him away. Cyan was still sobbing, completely broken by what had just happened. After they left, the room fell silent. Anasilia just stood there, watching the doors close. She let out a long breath, fanning herself to try and calm her nerves, but her eyes were cold. The anger was gone, replaced by something much more calculated. She turned to her daughter, Ciel, who was still in the room. Ciel answered her mother immediately. Anasilia smiled, but it wasn't a kind one. She confirmed Eugene's name and ordered Ciel get close to him. Ciel didn't understand. She asked why, pointing out that Eugene was the one who had just beaten her brother. Her mother's expression turned dark. She confessed that what she really wanted was for Eugene to be killed. The only reason she hadn't done it was because she'd be the first person they'd suspect. She explained that in the Lionheart family, killing a relative was a huge crime. It would summon the guardians of the familial code, and that was a line she couldn't cross. So, Anasilia explained, since they couldn't get rid of Eugene, it was better to keep him close. Ciel agreed immediately. She admitted that she was curious to learn more about him anyway, and promised to become his friend. A cold, satisfied smile spread across her mother's face. Her plan was now in motion. The next day, more heirs from the other collateral families began to arrive. First came Deacon, Hansen, and Juice. They were some of the other kids competing in the ceremony, but while they were settling in, Eugene was already outside, pushing his new body to its limits. He was so focused that he almost ran past Nina, the maid, who called out to him. He stopped to catch his breath and said hello. Nina came running up telling him that the other heirs were here. Eugene figured they must have arrived early, but she was stammering, clearly terrified. It wasn't just the other kids. The head of the Lionheart family was here too. Eugene stopped. The head of the Lionhearts. This was a big deal. Nina started freaking out, insisting he had to change clothes before greeting him. But Eugene knew that would just make him the last one to show up. He decided it was better to just go sweaty. When he got there, the entire household was already gathered. Guards lined the main path, and everyone was standing in formation. Eugene found a spot in the crowd. While the other kids looked nervous, he just watched calmly. Up at the front stood the second wife, Anacilia, with Ciel and Cyan beside her. Cyan still looked completely miserable. Eugene looked over and saw the legal wife, Theonis. She had a cold, serious look on her face. The boy with her was Iode Lionheart. He was the eldest son of the direct line, first in line to take over everything, and he looked pretty stressed out. That's when two riders on horseback came through the main gate, followed by their carriages. Everyone's attention was on them. This was the moment they'd all been waiting for. The man leading the way was Galati Lionheart, the current head of the family. Riding right behind him was his younger brother, Gian, who had a confident smile on his face. Iode watched as the head of the family got closer, looking more nervous by the second. Galati stopped right in front of Iode and put a hand on his head. He asked the boy if he'd just gotten taller, or if his skills had improved too. Iode stammered, promising his father that he was trying his absolute hardest to meet his expectations. Gilade just looked down at him, his face impossible to read. It was a heavy, awkward silence. Without another word, he moved on, turning his attention to the other children of the direct line. He greeted Cyan and Ciel with a smile, remarking on how much they'd grown. Ciel happily told him they'd missed him. Then, Galadi turned to another man in the crowd, calling him by name, Guilford. He looked genuinely sorry, apologizing for not being there when Guilford's son was born. Guilford quickly told his brother not to worry about it, clearly surprised by the personal apology. Finally, Giladi's gaze fell upon the last group, the children from the collateral line, and right at the front stood Eugene. After looking over all the children, Gilade announced that they would all have a meal together. He smiled, explaining that it was time to discuss the bloodline continuation ritual. The real test was about to begin. So, everyone gathered in the grand dining hall. The table was massive, stretching across the room under a huge chandelier. At the head of the table sat Gilade, the patriarch. Beside him were the children of the direct line, Iode, Ciel, and Cyan. But there was also a stranger, a man with long blonde hair, who didn't seem to belong. On the other side sat Eugene and the rest of the kids from the collateral lines. The mood was pretty heavy. Among the collateral children were two notable figures, Gargus and Desera. Eugene recognized them immediately. They were the ones who had arrived with the family head through the warp gates. He figured they must be from the most highly regarded collateral families. Everyone's attention, however, kept drifting to the blonde man. He just sat there smiling, but his presence made no sense. This meal was supposed to be for family and the children participating in the ritual. Ciel watched the guest carefully, trying to figure out who he was. Finally, she leaned over and quietly asked her father who the stranger was. Gilady just hummed, giving nothing away. Galati chuckled, telling his daughter he was going to introduce their guest later, but now was as good a time as any. Eugene just watched from his seat, taking a quiet sip from his cup. The man stood up with a huge smile. He introduced himself to all the children as Loberian from the Red Tower. That name hit the room like a shockwave. All the other kids from the collateral lines stared, completely stunned. Cyan was speechless. One of the kids even whispered that Liberian was the tower master of the Red Tower. The name was so shocking that Eugene spit his drink all over the table. He coughed hard, trying to catch his breath. Liberian looked over, asking if he was all right. Eugene just waved him off, insisting he was fine. But inside, his mind was racing. The master of the Red Tower. That meant he was connected to Sienna. To be exact, he wasn't her disciple, but the disciple of her disciple. Eugene's mind raced. Sienna wasn't just some powerful mage. 300 years ago, she became the youngest tower master in the history of Aeroth. She even rewrote all the standard magic textbooks from scratch. Her knowledge was so great that she didn't just teach students. She taught the other tower masters themselves. That's why, even today, the masters of both the Green and Red Towers still consider Sienna the Wise to be their grand master. It was unbelievable. He never thought he'd meet someone connected to his old comrades, especially not here. That's when the head of the family, Gilade, turned his attention to him. He confirmed Eugene's name, adding that Theonis had told him what happened. Gilade looked at him seriously and said that he'd heard his own son had insulted both Eugene and his father. Eugene tensed up. He didn't expect the family head to bring that up right here, right now. He quickly confirmed that it happened, but assured Gilade that he didn't hold any grudges. Gilead corrected him, saying it wasn't about grudges. The only thing that mattered was that Eugene won the duel. But Eugene didn't back down. He argued that it would be the same even if he'd lost. If he was too weak to defend his own honor, then he deserved the shame that came with it. Gilead's expression changed. A small smile appeared on his face as he told Eugene that he was better than his own son. He then turned to Cyan, placing a heavy hand on his shoulder. Cyan flinched, barely able to answer his father. Gilead told his son that he wasn't ashamed of the defeat. He was disappointed that Cyan was so busy worrying about his father's reaction, instead of feeling the shame of his own actions. Cyan couldn't say a word. He just lowered his head, completely crushed. The patriarch continued, his voice echoing across the table. He reminded Cyan that the duel started because of his insult, and yet he never apologized to Eugene. Cyan panicked, stammering as he tried to find an excuse, but there was nothing he could say. Gilead told Cyan that being a Lionheart wasn't just about power. He said that if he truly carried Vermouth's blood. He needed to learn how to honor his opponent, not just himself. Cyan looked over at Eugene, his face filled with shame. He knew what he had to do. He struggled for a moment before finally spitting out an apology, but Eugene could see right through it. The apology was completely forced. With the matter settled, Gilead turned his attention to Eugene. He asked about his father, Gerhard, but admitted he didn't recognize the name. Eugene wasn't offended at all. He just said it made sense, since his family lived in the middle of nowhere. Gilead then asked if his father had trained him. Eugene explained that his dad only taught him the basics, and he'd figured out the rest all by himself. Ciel's eyes went wide when she heard that. She couldn't believe he had trained to that level without any real teacher. Jian was stunned. This kid from a collateral line, with no real training, had completely beaten Cyan. Gilead just smiled. He thought to himself that this year's ceremony was going to be very entertaining. With that, everyone moved to the dining hall for the promised meal. Everyone took their seats. The tension between the kids was obvious, even as the servants placed the food in front of them. It was an incredible feast, the kind of meal Eugene had never seen before. Gilead raised his hand and invited everyone to eat, telling them they must be hungry. Hours passed, and the meal finally came to an end. The maids came to clear the table, stacking up the empty plates. The meal had finished. As the servants cleared the plates, a heavy silence fell over the room. Gilead finally broke the silence. He told everyone that it was time to explain the bloodline continuation ceremony. All the kids listened carefully. Eugene's expression was serious, waiting to hear what was next. Then Gilead said something that surprised everyone. He admitted that he thought the traditional ceremony was extremely unfair. He explained that the ceremony was designed for the direct bloodline. Kids from the collateral lines weren't allowed to train with mana, so it was impossible for them to win. Gilead stated that his own 3 children would be participating. He then paused, looking at them all, but he made it clear this year would be different. He wanted to test the potential of everyone who carried the Lionheart name. He said direct and collateral were meaningless. All that mattered was proving they were descendants of the Great Vermouth. Hearing that name, Vermouth, hit Eugene differently. It always did. Eugene thought to himself that Gilead was a much kinder man than Vermouth had ever been. Gilead announced that to make things fair, they'd brought in help. That's when a man with long blonde hair stood up, introducing himself to the children. He had a confident look on his face, clearly enjoying the attention. Suddenly, a bright blue light shot out from the center of the table, startling one of the kids. The light formed a glowing maze right on the tabletop. Liberian explained the test. Each of them would enter from a different spot. Their goal was to reach the center and defeat an elite monster. He warned them that the path wouldn't be easy. There would be plenty of traps and fights along the way. But then, he revealed the most important rule. Everything inside the maze was just an illusion he created with magic. Nothing they experienced would be real. He smiled, telling them to just think of it as an action-packed adventure. Eugene was impressed. He realized the mage was using a powerful mix of summoning and mind control magic. It was the kind of skill you'd expect from a tower master. The mage explained that if even one of them defeated the boss monster, the test would be over. Everyone would then get points based on how much they helped. One of the other kids looked terrified. He nervously asked what would happen if they couldn't make it out of the maze. The blonde mage just smiled. She told him that if he was scared, he could just stay at the entrance, but he wouldn't get any points for it. But Eugene wasn't worried about the danger. He just wanted to know what they'd get for defeating the boss. The head of the family, Gilead, listened with a calm smile. He seemed pleased with the question. He opened his eyes and announced the prize. The winner would be allowed to take a single treasure from the family's secret underground vault. Eugene's face lit up. A real treasure from the Lionheart vault. That changed everything. After the meeting, Eugene walked alone down the main hall. He wasn't wondering if he would win. He was already thinking about which treasure he was going to take from the vault. His expression hardened. That's when he saw 2 people waiting for him down the hall. It was Gargus and Desira, 2 other kids from the collateral line. And from the looks on their faces, the bigger kid, Gargus, stepped forward with a skeptical look. He asked if it was true, if Eugene really beat Cyan Lionheart in a duel. Eugene didn't even blink. He just said yeah, like it was nothing. He had no interest in talking about it. He told them if they were done asking questions, he was leaving. Gargus was left standing there, completely stunned. He couldn't believe Eugene just walked off. The 2 of them were totally baffled. They had no idea what to make of him. But Eugene wasn't thinking about them at all. Later that night, he was already outside, training under the full moon. He moved with incredible speed, his blade cutting through the air. His eyes were locked forward. The upcoming test was the only thing on his mind. Suddenly, his training was interrupted. It was Gargus, the other kid from the collateral line, and he was flexing with everything he had. He turned around, showing off his back muscles, which were practically sparkling. Eugene just stared, not saying a word. He couldn't figure it out. He seriously wondered if the guy was an idiot. Gargus even offered to let him touch his muscles to feel how real they were. Eugene flatly refused. That's when Gargus finally got to the point. He explained that his family had a secret muscle growth medicine. He claimed it could speed up muscle growth based on training, all without building up mana in the body. And best of all, he said it had no side effects. He finished his pitch and asked if Eugene was interested. Eugene just looked at him and asked if he was trying to sell him some kind of fake potion. Eugene already knew the truth. No side effects? That was a lie. He knew that whether you were a man or a woman, if you took that stuff, you grew a beard. That's when the girl, Desira, spoke up. She asked why he was training with a wooden sword when she heard he used a spear to beat Tian. Eugene just said that he uses both. She seemed interested and asked if he was good with any weapon he picked up. Before he could answer, she tossed one of her wooden spears right at him. He caught it easily. With a grin, she told him that the spear was was her specialty. She wanted to duel him with it. Eugene thought about it. A duel with her definitely seemed better than listening to the other guy try to sell him muscle medicine. Besides, he was curious to see what kids from the high-ranking collateral families could do. So he agreed. They took their positions in the courtyard, facing each other. The duel was on. Just as they were about to start, Gargus stepped right between them. He grabbed both their spears and announced that he would be the judge. He struck a dramatic pose, flexing his muscles. He declared that even though it was just a practice duel, it had to be fair. Eugene just stared at him. The guy's whole attitude reminded him of a certain moron he knew from his past life. He couldn't help but wonder if this kid was somehow related to Milan. Gargus explained that they would only start when he gave the signal. Desira was getting impatient. She yelled back that she understood and told him to just get on with it. Desira got into her stance, her eyes fixed on Eugene. She thought it was ridiculous that he claimed to be good with both a sword and a spear. She was determined to teach him a lesson. Spearmanship wasn't some hobby you could just mess around with. With a loud shout and a chop of his hand, Gargus officially started the match. The second he gave the signal, Desira exploded forward. She believed that the one who attacks first always has the advantage, but her charge came to a dead stop. Eugene hadn't moved an inch. Desira pushed with everything she had, but it was like pushing against a mountain. He wasn't even fighting back, just holding his position. Eugene just watched her. He could see she had a perfect stance. There were no openings at all, so he decided to provoke her. He asked what she was waiting for and told her to come at him. She gritted her teeth, clearly getting annoyed. With a yell, she lunged forward again, putting all her power into the strike. Their spears slammed into each other with a loud crack. The impact was so strong, it sent both of them sliding back. Desira put every ounce of her strength into the push. Her face twisted with effort. She swung her spear down hard, but Eugene met her strike perfectly, stopping it cold. She grunted, realizing she couldn't break through his defense at all. The force from his block was so strong, it sent her flying backward through the air. He was actually impressed. He thought she was excellent, especially since she wasn't even using mana. For her age, her potential was huge, but he knew she was still no match for him. With that thought, he stopped defending and went on the attack himself. He stood over her with a grin, teasing her about not being able to land a single hit. All she could do was yell at him to shut up. Desira couldn't believe it. He was blocking every single one of her attacks without even moving. She gritted her teeth, convinced his overconfidence would be his downfall. She lunged forward, slamming her spear down with all her might. But Eugene met her strike head on, and the impact sent a shockwave through the air. He didn't even flinch, just casually knocked her spear aside. Instead of backing down, she used the momentum to circle around him, looking for an opening. She grinned, sure that he wouldn't be able to block her from this new angle. With a powerful leap, she came at him from above. But instead of using his hands, Eugene just kicked the end of his own spear, flicking it up to block her. He didn't just block her. He stepped right onto his own spear, pinning hers to the ground. The impact sent her stumbling backward, completely breaking her balance. She grunted, trying to hold on, but she was completely overpowered. And just like that, it was over. The tip of his spear was pointed right at her throat. She couldn't move. In the background, Gargus watched the whole thing without a word. He stared for a moment, then announced the result. The victory belonged to Eugene Lionheart. Later that night, Eward showed up with a serious look on his face. He announced that they needed to combine their strengths. Turns out, he'd burst into Eugene's room to say this. Eugene was not happy about it. He asked if this was really so important that it couldn't wait until morning. But Eward was completely serious. He stood his ground and demanded an answer. Eugene sighed and explained the obvious problem. They both knew about the bloodline continuation ceremony, but everyone would be starting from different entrances. He asked how they were supposed to team up. Eward had already thought about that. He explained that even if the entrances were different, the destination was the same, the center of the labyrinth, where the boss monster was. He was sure the twins from the main family would be doing the exact same thing. So Eugene laid out the plan to make sure he understood. They would all meet at the center and fight the boss together. Eward confirmed that was exactly the idea. Eugene just smirked. He said he was pretty sure he could defeat it all by himself. Eward immediately called him out for being full of himself. Eugene listened from his bed, looking unimpressed. The girl stood by the door with her arms crossed, waiting for his answer. She admitted that he was full of himself, but he was also strong. With his help, she said, they could definitely defeat the boss monster. That got Eugene's attention. He leaned forward and asked why she wanted to kill it so badly. Her expression hardened. She explained that in the entire history of the ceremony, the collateral line had never once won. But this time, she said, they had a real chance. It would be her, Gargus, and him, the one who defeated Cyan. Just then, Gargus himself walked into the room. She looked him right in the eyes and asked the real question. Didn't he want to beat the direct line? Eugene didn't answer right away. He just sat there, thinking about what she'd said. Elsewhere in the mansion, Ancilla stood by the window, staring out at the full moon. She was thinking about the Red Tower Master. He'd been invited to the ceremony, and she suspected he was here to take Ioti as his disciple. From a young age, Ioti had always preferred books over fighting. He had a natural interest in magic, and had learned what he could on his own. If Ioti did become the Tower Master's disciple, he'd have to leave the family for a while. In that time, San and Ciel would keep getting stronger, and Iode would basically be giving up his position. The real problem was the bloodline continuation ceremony. Her children would always have to live with the fact that they were born from the second wife. It was only because she stood strong that they had maintained their positions. But for them to be defeated by a kid from a lesser family line, the thought made her grip her fan so tightly, it started to crack. But then, a new idea started to form. What if that Eugene kid was the one to break through the labyrinth first? What if his talent was so exceptional that he ended up humiliating the entire direct line? She suddenly realized that if Eugene's talent was truly that great, his success could actually hide her son's embarrassing defeat. It was a perfect solution. 3 days passed. The day of the bloodline continuation ceremony finally arrived. All the kids from the different family lines gathered in front of a massive, glowing portal. The woman in charge held up a glowing ball of light, a confident smile on her face. Suddenly, the light shot out from her hands in every direction. Ciel and Cyan focused, trying to gather the light just like she had. Eugene and the other kids from the lesser families did the same, their hands glowing with energy. The instructor explained the first test. They had to create their own weapons by shaping the light with their imagination. The other kids were having a tough time. They struggled to get the light to form into anything solid, and their faces showing the strain. But Ciel had no problem at all. She focused her energy, and a perfect glowing sword formed right in her hands. She looked at it, completely amazed by what she had just created. She gave it a few practice swings, the blade cutting through the air like it was real steel. She asked the instructor what would happen if the sword broke. The instructor smiled and explained that since the labyrinth was also made of magic, her weapon was basically unbreakable inside. One of the other kids asked if he could make an animal instead of a sword. The instructor told him they could make dolls or even golems, but creating actual living creatures was impossible. That made Cyan curious. He asked why they couldn't just create life. The instructor's tone became serious. She explained that creating life is a taboo in magic, a special power that only living creatures themselves are meant to have. Eugene looked down at his hands, his eyes wide with surprise as he felt the magic gathering. While he was still figuring it out, Cyan had already created a massive greatsword out of pure light. He proudly told Ciel that he'd recreated his favorite sword from back home, only this one was real. She just stared at him and bluntly asked if anyone had actually asked. Another girl from the family formed a long, glowing spear. One of the boys made a thin, elegant sword, looking pretty pleased with himself. Eugene, on the other hand, was still concentrating. He carefully formed his own weapon from particles of light. With their weapons ready, all the kids started practicing their moves in the forest. But Eugene wasn't just playing around. He'd made a sword and a shield, and his eyes were sharp. He was ready for a real fight. Cyan stepped forward, looking right at Eugene. He asked what would happen if they met inside the labyrinth. Ciel looked shocked by the question, wondering if her brother was really planning to fight him. Eugene asked if they were even allowed to fight. Just then, an elder stepped in. He explained that competition was the very heart of the ceremony, but he also reminded them that cooperation was just as important. After all, they all shared the same Lionheart blood. Eugene glanced over at Ciel, the word family echoing in his mind. She just gave him a smug little smile in return. That look on her face really annoyed him. With the weapons made, an instructor stepped forward. She held up a glowing necklace and told everyone to put one on. The instructor handed each of them a necklace with a glowing blue gem. Everyone put them on, getting ready for what was next. She explained that the necklace was connected to their minds. If they felt too much stress in the labyrinth, the gem would react. When that happened, she would know it was a dangerous situation and would step in to help them. Eugene understood immediately. It was a safety mechanism, just in case things went wrong. She also told them that if they felt they couldn't make it, they just had to tap the gem and call for help to leave the labyrinth. With the rules explained, she turned and pointed to a glowing cave entrance. It was time to go in, but she gave them one last warning. Even though they were entering together, they would all be sent down different paths inside. With that, the kids gripped their weapons and walked forward, heading straight into the glowing light of the labyrinth. Ciel waved goodbye, telling him to hang in there. He just wished her luck back. A bright light completely surrounded him, and just like that, he was gone. His feet hit solid ground. He was standing in a massive stone hallway, completely alone. But Eugene wasn't worried at all. In his past life, he'd explored so many labyrinths, he was sick of them. This was nothing new. He started checking his surroundings. The ceiling was completely blocked off. He gave his sword a quick swing, getting ready for whatever was coming. And sure enough, a faint shadow started to form on the wall right in front of him. He immediately noticed the narrow walls. A long weapon would be useless in a tight space like this. That's exactly why he'd chosen a sword and shield. It was a classic combination that could handle almost any situation. Besides, this was a labyrinth made for kids. He figured the difficulty would be a complete joke. With that thought, he charged straight into the darkness. Turns out, not everyone was as confident as Eugene. One of the other kids was already in deep trouble, screaming as he fought off a swarm of slime monsters. He was completely overwhelmed. With no other choice, he yelled for help and grabbed the blue gem on his necklace to signal for a rescue. Instantly, the instructor appeared in a flash of light. She grabbed the boy and pulled him to safety. And just like that, they were gone. The whole rescue took less than a second. It had only been an hour since the ceremony started. Already, 3 kids had been eliminated. The elders and the instructor watched them from a distance, looking unimpressed. He looked down at the 3 boys and simply told them to go and rest. The kids looked completely defeated. One of them was even crying as they quietly agreed. Meanwhile, the elders were watching the kids who were still in the labyrinth. Each one was being monitored through a glowing blue orb, and every kid had a totally different style. The old man noted that one of them, Gargus, was clumsy but incredibly strong. Another one, Desira, was quick and smart, avoiding fights whenever she could. And they were right. Gargus wasn't thinking about strategy. He was just pushing forward with pure power. When a couple of goblins appeared, he didn't hesitate for a second. He put all of his strength into a single, powerful swing. The blow connected, sending one of the goblins flying back. But his attack left him wide open. Another goblin easily blocked it and started laughing at him. That mockery was all it took. Gargus completely lost his cool and let out a furious yell. Fueled by pure rage, he unleashed a wild attack. He didn't need skill. His swing sent the goblins flying, shattering them completely. He slammed his weapon into the ground, and the shockwave finished off the rest. The elders watching agreed. Gargus was clumsy, but his raw strength was so overwhelming that he was having no trouble with the monsters. Meanwhile, another child, Desira, was facing a different challenge. Instead of goblins, she found herself surrounded by a group of strange, smiling slimes. Her style was the complete opposite of Gargus. She was fast and precise, dodging their attacks with ease. With a powerful thrust of her spear, she took one down cleanly. She knew fighting slimes with a blade was pointless. Her goal wasn't to kill them, but to find a way past them. So instead of fighting, she just shoved one out of the way and made a run for it. The elders watching were impressed. They could see she was quick and smart, focused on getting through the maze instead of wasting energy on fights. Elsewhere in the labyrinth, Cyan Lionheart was just getting started. He found himself in a long, dark hallway. The walls were covered in small holes, a classic trap, but Cyan just smirked. Turns out, his mother had given him and CLO a map of the labyrinth before the ceremony. He was confident he wouldn't fall for something so simple. He bent down and picked up a piece of rubble from the floor. With a confident grin, he tossed it down the hall, aiming to set it off. The rock flew down the hall, and instantly, dozens of arrows shot out from the walls, just as he expected. With the trap sprung, Cyan yelled out and charged forward, confident he was in the clear. Watching from somewhere else, Eugene smirked. He thought Cyan was a little too timid, but he had to admit that his caution was what kept him safe. It wasn't a bad strategy. Meanwhile, Ciel appeared in a different part of the labyrinth. A goblin was already waiting for her. The creature let out a scream and charged right at her. But Ciel was quick. She dodged its clumsy attack easily. With an opening, she let out a yell and lunged forward, her sword glowing with power. The blade struck true, hitting the goblin with a bright flash of light. Shil ran through the halls with a big smile, looking like she was having the time of her life. But her good mood soured when she hit a dead end. She sighed and decided to head back to the last fork in the road. The thing about Ciel is she's fast and relies on her gut, but she's still young and can be a little childish about things. Elsewhere, another kid named Iode found himself facing a monster. A goblin materialized right in front of him out of a blue portal. The creature looked mean, letting out a low growl as it got ready to fight. But instead of being terrified, Iode was fascinated. He realized the monster wasn't real. It was made entirely of magic. His amazement didn't last long. The goblin charged, and Iode screamed, barely getting his sword up in time. He managed to block the attack, their swords clashing in a shower of sparks. Iode swung his sword with all his might, clashing hard against the goblin's weapon. With one final push, he shattered the magical creature completely. As the goblin broke apart into golden dust, a huge smile spread across Iode's face. He was completely amazed. Turns out, two people were watching the whole thing on a magical screen. A woman commented that Iode seemed to have a real interest in magic. An elder sitting with her explained that the boy had loved magic since he was a baby, but when they tried to get him a teacher, he refused to continue his lessons. The woman was confused and asked why he would stop. The elder said that Iode had given up. He felt he had to become the next head of the family to make his mother proud, and in their family, magic wasn't valued. The woman understood, admitting that the path of a mage was a difficult one, but the elder said he still wished that Iode would follow his passion for the arcane art. The elder was sure that if Iode still had a passion for magic, he wouldn't be able to refuse the chance to become a disciple of the Red Tower Master. The woman listened carefully, but told him she couldn't make any promises. She agreed to meet the boy, but made it clear that if he didn't have enough potential, she wouldn't make him her disciple. The elder smiled, saying he had no intention of forcing it. He just hoped the boy would get to follow his dreams. He then shared something interesting. Instead of looking up to his own ancestor, the Great Vermouth, Iode actually revered the wise Sienna. The woman agreed completely. She said that in the stories of the heroes, she always preferred Sienna's part, especially how she'd come up with amazing new spells whenever the team was in danger. The elder added that he'd also read that story many times as a kid, but his favorite person in the story was neither Sienna nor Vermouth. She leaned in with a curious smile and asked him who he liked best. The elder smiled, ready to share who his favorite character was, but before he could answer, his expression completely changed. He pointed at something, telling her to look. On the viewing screen, they could see what was happening inside. Eugene was already facing his first monster. He stood his ground, sword and shield ready. The monster stared him down, but Eugene looked completely unfazed. The creature let out a furious roar and charged straight at him. It threw a huge punch, but Eugene blocked it easily with his shield. He didn't even move an inch. The monster's fist slammed into the stone floor, but Eugene was already gone. He moved like a blur, weaving between all of their attacks. They couldn't even touch him. The two men watching the screen were completely stunned. The blonde-haired man couldn't believe what he was seeing and asked who this kid even was. The white-haired man was speechless. All he could say was that it was amazing. Back in the labyrinth, Eugene met the monster's next attack head-on. The impact was huge, shaking the entire hallway. The elder's eyes were fixed on the screen as he finally said the boy's name, Eugene Lionheart. The troll collapsed, its body melting into a green puddle on the floor. Eugene just stood there, watching it disappear. He didn't look tired or scared. He was just ready for whatever came next. The two men watched him through the portals, completely captivated by what they were seeing. The elder couldn't hide his smile. He commented on how incredible it was. A 13-year-old should have been terrified, but Eugene took down the troll without any fear. The blonde-haired man looked stunned. He explained that the troll wasn't even supposed to be fought. It was just a trap meant to be avoided, yet Eugene had killed it easily. The elder just smiled, suggesting that it was possible if the boy simply had natural-born talent. The blonde man leaned forward, asking if the elder knew what they called kids with that kind of gift. A genius. The word genius hung in the air. It wasn't just about skill. It was about a certain kind of spirit, a confidence that Eugene had in spades. But as the men watched the screens, they saw that not everyone was having such an easy time. Another monster's punch landed with incredible force. The young man was sent flying, completely overpowered. He tumbled through the air, completely helpless. He landed hard, arrows already sticking from his back. He was cornered, bloodied and beaten. He let out a furious scream. He channeled all his remaining energy into one final, desperate attack. His sword came down with everything he had left, slamming right into the troll's arm. The blade sliced clean through. The monster stumbled back, its arm completely gone. But the boy wasn't done. He was already on top of the creature, a dagger in his hand. He stabbed it again and again, not giving it a single second to recover. The troll let out one last, agonizing roar. Its lost hand dissolved into nothing, and then its massive body came crashing down. The fight was over. He gasped for air, the pain from the fight hitting him all at once. The troll's body vanished into green light, leaving him alone in the hallway. But just as he caught his breath, a trap exploded from the floor. The blast threw him back, adding to his already serious injuries. He clutched his chest, feeling his broken ribs. He had to admit, the troll was incredibly strong. He forced himself up, thinking about the others. After all the traps and that fight, he knew they had to be struggling too. But his body had reached its limit. He collapsed, completely spent. He wasn't the only one in danger though. Elsewhere in the maze, Cyan Lionheart came face to face with his own opponent. Cyan froze. A troll. He couldn't believe a monster that big was actually here. But he quickly realized this wasn't a monster he was meant to fight. It had to be a trap. So instead of attacking head on, he threw a rock right at the troll's back. The creature turned around, absolutely furious. And that was the opening he needed. He bolted right past it. He grinned, proud of himself for pulling it off. With the path clear, he kept moving forward through the maze. That's when he heard a familiar voice. It was his sister, Ciel, calling out his name. He was so relieved to see her. Ciel pointed out that since they'd started in different spots, but still met up, they had to be getting close to the center of the maze. Cyan puffed out his chest, telling her that as long as she followed him, she wouldn't get lost. Ciel cheered, happy to have her big brother taking charge. But this wasn't just about the maze. He was still furious about how Eugene had embarrassed him a few days ago. This was his chance to finally repair his reputation in front of his sister. Ciel called out to him. Cyan immediately put on his brave face, telling her she could ask him anything. She asked if the maze being an illusion meant that any kind of monster could just appear out of nowhere. Cyan acted like it was an obvious question. So Ciel gave him an example, like ghosts. Turns out, that was exactly the wrong thing to say. Cyan's confident look completely vanished. Ciel saw right through him. She smirked and asked if he was afraid of things like ghosts. Cyan quickly tried to recover his cool. He grabbed his sword and told her not to worry, promising that no matter what showed up, her big brother would handle it. But right then, a brutal face with a glowing eye peeked around the corner. Cyan completely lost it and let out a huge scream. Turns out, the monster was screaming too. Between them, Ciel just stood there with a little smile, enjoying the chaos. When he finally got a good look, Cyan realized who it was. He pointed at the girl, Desira, and yelled, asking how she dared to scare him like that. Desira just yelled right back. She told him he was the one who scared her by screaming out of nowhere. Cyan wasn't buying it. He pointed at the blood on her face and accused her of planning an ambush. But Desira explained that she just got hurt from one of the maze's traps. Desira was pissed. Her ambush had completely failed. For a second, they all just stared at each other. Desira seemed completely thrown off by their reaction. That's when Ciel yelled out, pointing that Desira was trying to get away. Cyan was furious. He felt like a complete fool, and it was all her fault. He swore he wouldn't let her get away with it, and told Ciel they were going after her. And just like that, the chase was on. Desira sprinted down the hallway, with the two of them right behind her. She knew she couldn't win a 2-on-1 fight. She desperately looked around for her partner, but it was too late. Her partner was already on the ground, completely taken out of the fight. Desira was sprinting for her life, but she stopped dead in her tracks. She realized she'd run right into a trap. The entire hallway started to crumble, but she was quick. She jumped across the falling rocks to get away. She landed safely on the other side. Without even looking back, she took off running again, leaving Cyan and Ciel stuck on the other side of the huge gap. Cyan stared at the chasm. The floor had completely caved in, and it was way too far to jump. He wondered if he'd have to find another way around. But then he looked over at CL. He couldn't stand the idea of looking like a fool in front of her again. He decided right then and there he had something saved for the boss monster, but it looked like he had no other choice. He decided he had no choice but to use his mana. A bright blue aura exploded around him as he got ready to jump. With a yell, he took off, moving faster than I'd ever seen him go. He launched himself into the air, flying right over the huge gap. He landed perfectly on the other side. He immediately turned back and reached out a hand. He told CL to jump too, promising he'd catch her. CL didn't even hesitate. She gathered her own mana and leaped across the gap just like he did. She landed gracefully right in front of him. Cyan tried to play it cool, acting like he knew she could do it all along. He nervously praised her for being a good younger sister. Jen yelled that they had to keep going. CL was right there with him, ready for anything. The three of them, Cyan, CL, and Asura, raced through the maze. They finally made it to the center, and waiting for them was a monster bigger than anything they'd ever seen. They couldn't believe their eyes. This was the boss monster. But then a voice came from the side. It was Eugene, casually asking why the three of them showed up together. Cyan stammered, demanding to know what he was doing there. Eugene just told him he'd been waiting. He smirked, adding that he was curious to see who would make it to the center first. Cyan couldn't believe it. He asked Eugene if he'd really just been waiting around to see who would show up first. CL pointed out that Eugene was the one who got here before anyone else. He just calmly agreed with her. Desira, looking pretty beat up, asked if this meant he was finally accepting her offer to team up. Eugene pretended to think about it for a second, before completely shutting her down. He told them he wasn't teaming up with anyone. He was just giving them his turn. He explained that he could beat the boss by himself in no time, but he figured that would be too sad for everyone else who had to struggle just to get here. Cyan was furious. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Eugene completely ignored him and pointed at the massive monster. He explained that the boss wouldn't attack unless they got close, so for now, it was just waiting. He then laid out the plan. They would fight the monster one by one in the order they arrived. Desira would go first, then Cyan, and finally CL. He asked if that sounded fair, like it wasn't even up for discussion. Desira couldn't believe it. She stammered, asking if he seriously expected her to fight that thing all by herself. Eugene just smirked. He pointed out how beat up she looked from the maze and told her she could just give up if she didn't think she could win. But that just fired her up. She yelled that she would never give up. She tied the cloth around her forehead, getting ready for the fight. With her mind made up, she walked toward the monster, ready to face it alone. Cyan turned to Eugene, asking if he wasn't going to fight. Eugene just said he'd go last, after everyone else was done. That set Cyan off. He shot back, asking if Eugene really thought he'd even get a turn. He promised that he would be the one to defeat the boss monster. Eugene's grin got even wider. He made a bet with Cyan right then and there. If Cyan could actually beat the monster, he promised to call him elder brother for the rest of his life. Cyan was speechless. The bet completely threw him off. Eugene just grinned, warning him not to forget those words. With the bet made, Cyan sat down to wait. He was annoyed, but he wasn't backing down. As they waited, he stared at the monster. He knew what it was. The Minotaurus, the legendary boss of the labyrinth. Up close, the creature was massive, even bigger than the troll he'd fought before. He figured it was probably less aggressive than a troll or an ogre, but even so, he knew there was no way he could hunt a monster this big all by himself. The massive beast stood there, completely still, and then its eye began to glow. Eugene watched from the side, figuring this would be difficult for Desira. The size difference alone was just insane. She looked so small standing there, all alone in front of the beast. Her eyes went wide. She couldn't believe she actually had to take down something that big, but she'd come too far to quit now. A fire lit in her eyes. She wasn't backing down. With a yell, she charged straight at the monster. She closed the distance in seconds, spear aimed and ready. She drove her spear right into its leg. The ground cracked from the force, but the monster didn't even seem to notice. She didn't stop though. She jumped and dodged, striking again and again from every angle she could find. She kept hammering away, putting all her strength into every single strike, but it was no use. She realized its skin was just too tough. Her spear couldn't even scratch it. That's when the monster finally moved. A huge hand came down right on top of her. It snatched her right out of the air. She was completely trapped. In that moment, she thought it was all over, but instead of crushing her, the monster just threw her like a toy. She slammed into the ground, completely out of the fight. With Desira down, it was over. Cyan and CL just stood there, watching. CL was confused. She asked why the monster threw Desira instead of just finishing the fight. Eugene explained that it wasn't a real monster. The moment it got its hands on her, the fight was already decided. Cyan stepped forward with a grin and drew his sword. He announced that it was his turn now. He looked right at Eugene and declared he was going to show him the difference between the main family and the collateral line. Eugene just gave him this huge, mocking smile. He wasn't impressed at all. That look completely set Cyan off. He muttered under his breath, wondering if Eugene really thought he couldn't beat the monster. He turned back towards the monster, telling Eugene to watch closely. A powerful blue aura exploded around him. The blue energy from his body flowed straight into his sword, making the blade glow with intense power. He held it up with a cocky grin, ready to prove himself. Desira, watching from the side, was completely stunned. She recognized the technique. It was sword ki, a blade of pure mana that should take at least 10 years to learn. The realization hit her hard. She wondered if the gap between her family and the main branch was just too big to overcome. Eugene, on the other hand, just crossed his arms. He admitted that seeing Sword Kai from someone so young wasn't bad. Cyan boasted that even though he couldn't maintain the technique for long, it was more than enough to cut down a real monster. But just as he said that, the blue light on his sword just disappeared. He stared at it, completely confused. He started to panic, demanding to know what was going on. His ultimate technique was gone. Eugene remembered the words of the man who set up this test. He wanted to see the true quality of every Lionheart without any prejudice between the main family and the collateral branches. Turns out, the entire labyrinth was a mirage. It was designed to stop anyone from using mana for attacks right here in the center. Eugene finally got it. If you couldn't use powerful techniques like Sword Kai, then everyone had to fight on equal terms. Cyan, on the other hand, had no idea what was going on. He kept demanding to know why his sword key wasn't working when he still had plenty of mana left. Eugene just smirked. He told Cyan that if he thought he was going to lose, he should just turn back and not get beat up just for being stubborn. Cyan was completely red in the face. Behind him, Ciel looked at him with sparkling eyes, while Eugene just leaned against the wall, enjoying the show. That was the last straw. Cyan yelled that he wouldn't be laughed at. He swore he could beat this monster even without his special technique. The massive monster let out a roar, and the fight began. Cyan charged forward, sword ready. The monster didn't hesitate, bringing a massive fist down to crush him. But Cyan was quick. He dodged under the punch and swung his sword, landing a clean hit on the creature's leg. He kept moving, using his small size to stay out of the monster's reach while looking for an opening. He knew right away that small cuts weren't going to be enough. He had to get in close and hit the legs hard to take it down. With his new plan set, he dove in low, aiming for a single, decisive blow. For a second, it looked like he had it. He grinned, thinking his plan had worked perfectly, but the monster was smarter than he thought. It slammed its knee down, blocking the sword completely. The impact sent him flying. He couldn't believe it. The creature had just blocked his sword with its bare knee. The monster didn't just block him. It swung its leg around and kicked him hard. The blow sent Cyan flying across the room. He tumbled through the air before crashing to the ground. As Cyan picked himself up, Eugene was already standing behind him with a smug grin. He told Cyan that he lost too. Cyan gritted his teeth, completely humiliated. Eugene turned to Ciel, asking who was next. But Ciel just shook her head. She said she didn't want to fight, especially since they couldn't even use their best techniques in the maze. Eugene seemed impressed. He noted that she was definitely smarter than her brother. With the others out of the way, Eugene walked over to a sword and shield lying against the wall. He picked them up, his eyes locked on the monster ahead. As he walked toward the giant beast, Ciel called out from behind, asking if he really thought he could win. Eugene didn't even turn around. He just said he wasn't sure it was possible for him to lose. He turned his head with a wild grin, full of confidence. He stood before the monster, looking like a tiny toy in comparison. But he wasn't scared at all. He just smirked and wondered aloud how he should take it down. The monster didn't wait for an answer. It threw a punch so fast, it was just a blur. The punch missed, but the force alone shattered the ground around him. Eugene slid right under it, using his shield to block the flying rocks. Instead of backing away, he ran straight up the monster's massive arm. His sword scraped against its wristband, sending sparks flying. He was completely focused on his target. He landed a solid hit on the creature's arm as he ran past. In a flash, he was on top of the monster's head, sword raised high. The Minotaur swung its other fist, trying to swat him off like a fly, but Eugene was already gone. He leaped away as the monster punched itself right in the face. The creature roared in pain, stunned by its own attack. Eugene landed perfectly, ready for his next move. He moved in, his eyes locked on the target. He was a blur, striking the monster from every angle with blinding speed. The other kids could only watch, their jaws on the floor. They had never seen anything like this. Desirus suddenly understood his plan. He wasn't just attacking randomly. He was aiming for the neck, a vital point. With his target chosen, Eugene closed the distance for the final blow. His sword sliced right through the monster's weak spot. The hit was clean and powerful. The massive creature staggered back, badly wounded. The fight was over. The monster's massive body crashed to the ground. Green blood splattered across the stone. Eugene calmly flicked his sword, cleaning off the blade. He turned to Cyan and Ciel, who were just staring, completely speechless. He asked them if they were watching. Cyan just stammered, his mind struggling to catch up. A huge grin spread across Eugene's face. He announced that he took care of it. Cyan's face turned red. He started yelling, telling Eugene not to act so smug and claiming he could have done it easily if his sword Kai had just worked. But in his head, he knew the truth. He might have been able to kill the monster, but there was no way he could have done it as perfectly as Eugene just did. But for Cyan, this was more than just fear. He could feel an excitement building that he couldn't push down. He didn't understand what this feeling was. Then, something clicked. Golden light began to form in his hands. The light exploded outwards, creating a massive golden giant that towered over them. Ciel looked up, realizing what it meant. She announced that the ceremony was over. Far away, two people had been watching the entire thing unfold. One of them, an older man with long gray hair, let out a huge laugh. He turned to the woman beside him, completely amazed. He asked if she thought it was incredible that a boy from a collateral family, without any mana training, could defeat a Minotaur with such overwhelming skill. The other man agreed, though he looked troubled. He explained that a Minotaur is supposed to be too hard for one person to fight alone. That's why he designed the ceremony to encourage them to work together and try different strategies. But Eugene just blew past every trap and monster he'd made. The man was completely baffled, wondering just what kind of kid he was dealing with. The patriarch, however, just looked amused. He explained that Eugene had done nothing but train since the day he arrived. He'd even sent people to his hometown to check, and his reputation for being persistent was well known there too. He declared that the boy was born to fight, with a drive that matched his body. The whole ceremony was a success, just because they discovered a treasure like him. Then he turned to his companion and asked a simple question. Wasn't he disturbed by this? The man named Gilla got straight to the point. He told the patriarch that Eugene was much greater than his own children. If the difference was this big now, he wondered how huge the gap would be once Eugene started training his mana. But the patriarch just smiled. He said that was something to be happy about. Eugene's strength would only make the Lionheart name shine even brighter. Gilla pressed him, asking what would happen if Eugene decided he wanted to be the next heir and become the new family head. The patriarch's smile vanished. He was silent for a moment, thinking it over. Then he gave his answer. The head of the family must be the greatest of all the Lionhearts. If his own kin couldn't secure that position, then it was rightfully Eugene's. He said that if they were so weak, they couldn't defend the rights they were born with, then they weren't worthy of leading the Lionhearts in the first place. Gilla looked down, realizing he'd gone too far. He apologized, saying he shouldn't have overstepped as an outsider. With their conversation over, Gilla snapped his fingers, and the golden light surrounding them began to fade. But Gilla wasn't done. He looked the patriarch in the eye and gave him some serious advice. Adopt Eugene as his son. The patriarch was completely taken aback by the suggestion. Gilla explained his reasoning. A kid from a collateral family just beat the direct bloodline. That alone could make the other families lose respect and lead to serious problems. The patriarch stroked his beard, thinking it over. He admitted it was a very tempting idea, but before any of that, he said with a grin, they needed to congratulate the winner. They watched as the children, led by Eugene, walked away from the testing grounds. The children all stood in a line, waiting for the patriarch to speak. The test was over, and now it was time to hear the results. The patriarch looked over each of them, his expression serious, as he prepared to give his judgment. He started with Iode, pointing out that he couldn't even reach the center of the labyrinth. He'd gotten too distracted by all the different magic and monsters along the way. The patriarch said it was disappointing. In a ceremony meant to prove oneself, getting blinded by curiosity and losing sight of the goal was a serious failure. He then turned to Cyan and Ciel. He praised them for getting past the traps and monsters, but noted they couldn't defeat the Minotaur. He chalked it up to inexperience that could be fixed with more training. His expression softened into a smile. He looked at all of them and said that everyone did well. He told them he'd been watching their progress from afar. He thought the test would be really difficult, but he was impressed by how well they all handled it. Finally, he turned his attention to the one who had stood out from the rest. He called out Eugene's name, and Eugene simply answered. The patriarch declared that out of all 9 children at the ceremony, Eugene was the most outstanding. Eugene just bowed his head and thanked him. He continued, praising how Eugene handled the traps and monsters. He was especially impressed that Eugene faced a troll head-on and won without a single injury. This news sent a shockwave through the other family members who were watching. One of them couldn't believe it. He wondered out loud how a kid with such a small body could possibly defeat a troll without getting hurt. Another man thought it was a shame. He imagined how much stronger Eugene could be if he just had his family's special muscle growth medicine. The man with the patriarch just smiled. He admitted he thought the kids would be stuck in the labyrinth for at least 2 days, but he'd clearly underestimated everyone. He figured it made sense, since they were all from the bloodline of the Great Vermouth. Just watching these talented kids was enjoyable on its own. The patriarch told everyone to go get some rest. He said he wanted to throw a big party for them right now, but he hadn't prepared one because he never expected them to get out of the labyrinth so early. He told them to rest up for the banquet tomorrow. Then he ordered a man named Liberian to take the children back. So the children started to head back, following the adults. But just as they were leaving, the patriarch called out to Eugene. He told him to come with him. Ciel looked over, surprised by the sudden change of plans. She asked the patriarch if he was giving Eugene his reward right now. He just smiled and said there was no reason to wait. Ciel realized where he was taking him, the underground treasure vault. She'd begged her father for years to see it, but he had never once taken her there. She just watched as the patriarch led Eugene down the path, away from everyone else. The sun was warm as they walked down the path. The patriarch led Eugene away from the main grounds, just the two of them. As they walked, the patriarch praised Eugene for being so good with different weapons. Eugene just said he was being given too much credit, but the old man insisted it wasn't just empty praise. He pointed out that Eugene used a sword and shield in the labyrinth, and a spear when he fought Cyan and Desaria. Eugene was a little surprised, so he even knew about the fight with Desaria. But then, he figured it made sense, since the man was the head of the entire family. The patriarch continued, explaining that even though the sword is the symbol of the Lionhearts today, their ancestor, the Great Vermouth, could use any weapon perfectly. He was so good, he was called the God of War, the master of all. But he added that Vermouth wasn't the only one. His friend, Sir Hamel, was also a master of weapons, second only to the great hero himself. Eugene cleared his throat and mentioned that in the stories he'd read, Hamel was always called Stupid Hamel. The patriarch laughed. He said he'd read those stories too, but argued that if Hamel wasn't so troublesome, the whole tale would have been pretty boring. Then he looked at Eugene and made a confession. To be honest, He actually liked Sir Hamel more than Sir Vermouth. Eugene was stunned. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. He had to ask why. The patriarch explained that he liked Hamel's human qualities more than Vermouth's godlike perfection. He said that even the storybooks showed it. He recounted how Hamel always felt he was second best to Vermouth, but he never despaired. Instead, he just tried even harder, always pushing past his limits. And in the end, the patriarch said with deep respect, Hamel sacrificed himself for his friends. Eugene knew the patriarch was right. Storybooks always exaggerated things to teach a lesson. But still, hearing someone speak so highly of his past self felt strange. The patriarch seemed to be thinking the same thing. A huge grin spread across Eugene's face. He admitted that he liked Sir Hamel too, and that it felt good to hear someone say it. The patriarch just smiled, looking satisfied with the boy's answer. With their conversation over, he led Eugene towards a small tower guarded by knights. The guards opened the heavy doors, and the two of them walked inside. The room was empty, except for a single staircase leading down into the darks. They started down the steps, heading deep underground. The patriarch told him this was a special place. Eugene was the first person who wasn't the head of the family ever come down here. Eugene couldn't believe it and asked if he was really allowed inside. The patriarch smiled, reminding him of the promise he'd made. He explained that this had already been approved by the elders of the Senate. Eugene knew exactly who the Senate was. They were the old lions of the Lionheart family, the most powerful figures, including past family heads and even members from the collateral lines. As they continued down, Eugene asked what was in the treasure vault. The patriarch explained it held inheritances built up over hundreds of years, including treasures that once belonged to the great Vermouth. That got Eugene's attention. He immediately asked if the holy sword was down there too. The patriarch confirmed that it was, but told him straight up that he wouldn't be able to have it. The holy sword wasn't just a weapon. It was a symbol of the entire Lionheart family. It couldn't belong to just one person. Eugene looked a little disappointed, admitting it was a shame. The patriarch added that there was another reason. Ever since Sir Vermouth, not a single person had been acknowledged by the holy sword. Eugene was confused by the word acknowledged. The patriarch just told him he'd understand what he meant when he held it himself. They continued down the stairs, finally reaching a massive, ornate door. To open it, the patriarch bit his thumb, drawing a drop of blood. He let the blood fall onto a small golden lion head statue. Eugene watched, his eyes wide with curiosity. The moment the blood touched it, the statue's eyes began to glow with a bright blue light. A loud, grinding sound echoed through the hall as the giant circular door started to open. The massive door slid open, revealing the entrance to the family's treasure vault. They both stood there, staring into the darkness of the room beyond. The patriarch gestured for him to go inside. Eugene turned and asked if he was coming with him. He smiled and said he'd wait outside. He didn't want his presence to influence the boy's decision, explaining that Eugene should choose what he truly wanted. Eugene grinned, thanking him for being so thoughtful. With that, Eugene walked past him and stepped into the vault. The massive door began to grind shut behind him, leaving him completely alone in the dark. A wicked grin spread across his face. He was finally alone with all the family treasures, and he couldn't wait to see what was first on the list. The room was huge, filled with legendary weapons, but his eyes were immediately drawn to the center of the vault. A holy sword was floating there, glowing with an incredible golden light. This was the symbol of the Lionheart family, the sword of the great hero Vermouth. A greedy smile spread across his face. He wondered if he should just go ahead and try pulling it out. He remembered the stories. The holy sword was a gift from God, a weapon that had existed since the very beginning of the Holy Empire. It had been sealed away for ages, and only one person was ever acknowledged as its master, Vermouth. 300 years ago, that same sword had pierced the Demon King of Slaughter, one of the most powerful demons in existence. But Eugene remembered something else. After that one incredible fight, Vermouth basically just used the legendary sword as a torch. He knelt down in front of it, studying the golden glow. Then, he wrapped his hands firmly around the hilt. A huge, excited grin spread across his face as he got ready to pull. He pulled with every ounce of strength he had, but the sword didn't move an inch. It felt like it was fused to the ground. He grunted, pulling with all his might. The sword wouldn't budge at all. He let go, frustrated. Besides, the patriarch had already told him he couldn't have it anyway. It was time to find something else. He walked down the long hall, past rows of other legendary weapons, glowing on their stands. That's when he stopped. He recognized the next weapon on display. It was Aspel, the Sword of Gluttony. He remembered it well from his past life. Aspel had a special power. It could eat any mana it cut and turn it into its own strength. With a single swing, it could slice right through a powerful magic spell. But there was a catch. The only reason Vermouth could use it properly was because he was also an amazing magician. For Eugene right now, that sword was way too much to handle. As he walked deeper into the vault, he started seeing other weapons he knew from his past life. There was the draconian spear Carbos. It took a while to heat up, but its flames were as powerful as a dragon's breath. He saw the Stormblade Winneth, a sword blessed by the elemental spirit king of wind. The rampaging Thunderbow Perno was there too. It could strike down lightning from any distance. He recognized the flying elusive sword Jabel. When you put mana into it, it turned into a whip with hundreds of blades. And finally, Geddon's shield, which could send any attack it blocked into an empty void. They were all so powerful. He knew he wouldn't regret taking any one of them, but something felt off. He looked around and realized a few key items weren't there, like the Moonlight Sword and the Demon Spear. He realized that in the 300 years since his death, other Lionhearts had already taken the most powerful weapons. He was pretty annoyed. He had to choose something. Wynneth, the Stormblade, seemed like the easiest choice. Just by holding it, you could use wind elementals, and with enough mana, you could even summon the Wind Elemental King. That was a huge deal. Even the most talented mages struggled to control a single low-rank elemental. With Wynneth, that problem just disappeared. Still, he decided he should look around a bit more before picking one. He moved past the weapons and saw display cases filled with other treasures. There were gems and all sorts of accessories, not just swords and spears. But then, his eyes locked onto something. He froze. Without thinking, he reached out for it. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. He realized it was the necklace he wore as Hamel. It was the last thing he ever expected to see here. It was a memento from his parents, who were killed by monsters. He got his revenge a long time ago, but he never took it off. He couldn't understand why it was in the vault. He wondered if Vermouth had actually brought his body home after the battle. The thought gave him a little comfort. At least they didn't just leave him there to rot. But that comfort quickly faded. He remembered the promise Vermouth made with the Demon King of Incarceration. A deal that brought peace, but left 2 Demon Kings alive. He thought back to his old friends, Vermouth, Sienna, Milan, and Anise. They had all sworn to take down the 5 Demon Kings together. His anger flared up again. He couldn't understand what kind of promise they could have made that was worth breaking their vow. To him, placing his necklace here felt like a final insult. He couldn't wrap his head around it, especially Vermouth. What was he thinking when he made that deal? Then, a different thought hit him. Maybe it was his fault. Maybe they couldn't finish the job because he died halfway through the journey. He shook his head. He didn't want to blame them. They were his friends. They must have had a good reason for what they did. He looked around at all the legendary weapons. There were so many incredible things he could take, but he knew what he wanted. He couldn't let Hamel's keepsake just sit here and collect dust in the Lionheart vault. When the vault door opened, the Patriarch was waiting. He looked at what Eugene was holding and seemed completely surprised, asking if that was really what he picked. Eugene just smiled, holding up the necklace. He told him he just liked it. The Patriarch couldn't believe it. With all the amazing treasures in there, he chose a simple necklace. Eugene just explained that all the other weapons were things he couldn't handle yet. The Patriarch asked to see the necklace for a moment, and Eugene handed it over. He looked it over. It was an old, poorly made necklace. The gem wasn't valuable, and the craftsmanship was simple. Gilead held it up, completely baffled. He called it a cheap necklace, and wondered what something like this was even doing in the family vault. He decided to check it against the vault's registration system, holding it over the golden lion statue. The statue's eyes glowed red. He looked surprised. The necklace wasn't registered in the vault's records at all. He told Eugene that this wasn't a treasure of the Lionheart family. It was something that never should have been inside the vault in the first place. The Patriarch explained that the necklace had no real value. You couldn't even sell it for enough to buy a cheap sword. Despite all that, he asked Eugene if he was sure this was what he wanted. Eugene's face lit up. Without a moment of hesitation, he confirmed that was exactly what he wanted. The Patriarch sighed. He said if Eugene really wanted it, then it couldn't be helped. But there was one condition. Since the item wasn't registered, he explained he'd need to have someone named Lobarian appraise it. There was a chance it could have some kind of spell on it. Eugene immediately asked if he could have it back once it was checked out. Gilead gave him a reassuring smile and promised he would. He admitted he never expected this to happen. Technically speaking, what Eugene brought out wasn't a treasure of the Lionheart family, so that meant Eugene could go back inside and pick a different treasure. Eugene's eyes went wide. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. The Patriarch confirmed it. The original promise still stood. Eugene could go back and pick a treasure from the vault. Eugene quickly thanked him, then bolted back towards the vault without wasting a second. He couldn't believe how reasonable the Patriarch was. So different from the Vermouth he remembered. With a second chance like this, he wasn't going to hesitate. He went straight for the one he wanted, the Stormblade Wynneth. The blade glowed with power as he held it up. A wide grin spread across his face. The legendary sword was finally his. Night had fallen by the time he walked out of the vault, but as soon as he stepped outside, a girl from another collateral family was waiting for him. Her name was Desira, and she was furious. She demanded to know why he didn't pick the spear, especially when he was so good with it. Eugene just brushed her off, telling her it was his choice. He was good with the sword too, so it didn't matter. Desira was so frustrated she could barely speak. That's when another kid stepped in. He looked at the sword and commented that it seemed too light for Eugene. He argued that with Eugene's power, a heavy weapon like a hammer or an axe would be a much better fit. But Eugene just repeated himself. It was his choice. The guy started flexing, inviting Eugene to visit his family and offering him all the muscle-growing potions he could want. Eugene was not interested. The muscular kid tried to calm Desira down, but she just looked even more annoyed by all the noise. She ignored everyone else, her eyes fixed on Eugene. Then she gave him a simple command: draw the sword. Eugene didn't even flinch. He just stared back at them, completely sure of his choice. With a smooth motion, he drew the sword from its sheath. It immediately began to glow with a brilliant blue light. The other two kids stared at the blade. Desira asked what kind of sword it was. Eugene held it up proudly and told them its name, the Stormblade Wynneth. He explained that it wasn't just any sword. It held the blessing of the elemental king of wind, and once he trained his mana, he'd be able to call on that power. But Desira wasn't impressed. She clenched her fists, annoyed. She mumbled that it was cool, but she still would have picked a spear. She got more worked up, grabbing his arm and asking if he even saw the other weapons in there. She reminded him there were plenty of amazing spears. Her eyes lit up as she described one in particular, the draconian spear, Carbos. She said it was so powerful, it could shoot a dragon's breath with every single thrust. Eugene just stared at her. He casually told her he didn't even know what that looked like. She wasn't done. She brought up the demon spear Ruintus, claiming it was the strongest weapon Vermouth ever had. The other boy chimed in, adding that he'd heard of that spear. He said it was used by the demon king of brutality. Desira shoved him away, yelling that she wasn't talking to him. But that name, the demon king of brutality, it hit Eugene hard. He remembered 300 years ago, there were 5 demon kings ruling over the demon realm. At the very top was the demon king of apocalypse, and right below him, the demon king of incarceration. Then came the third, the demon king of frenzy, and finally, the fourth and fifth, the demon king of brutality and the demon king of slaughter. The boy spoke up again, looking right at Desira. He told her she was mistaken about which weapon was Vermouth's strongest. He claimed Vermouth's strongest weapon was actually a warhammer called the Destructive Crusher Gigalus. The boy argued back that the demon king of brutality was a higher rank than the demon king of slaughter. Desira just pointed at him and said the ranks didn't decide how strong the weapons were. Eugene just listened to them go back and forth. He knew the truth from his past life. There was no such thing as a destructive crusher. He remembered that out of all of Vermouth's weapons, only 2 actually came from demon kings. They were way too dangerous to be kept in a simple treasure vault. They had to have been sealed somewhere else. Their argument just kept going. She yelled that the spear was stronger, while he shouted back that it was the crusher. Eugene couldn't stand it anymore. He thought they were being so childish. He knew both weapons were incredible, so it was hard to decide. But if someone asked him to name the single strongest weapon in Vermouth's collection, he wouldn't even have to think about it. It was the Moonlight Blade, a sword that was basically destruction itself, sealed away deep in the demon realm, Helmuth. He remembered that the Moonlight Blade was the weapon that had slain both the demon king of brutality and the demon king of slaughter. He stood there for a moment, just holding the storm blade. A grin spread across his face. It was the first time in this new life that he'd held a real sword. That's when the blade began to glow with a bright blue light. Gilead and Ciel watched from a distance, completely surprised by what was happening. Eugene didn't even seem to notice them. He just pointed the glowing sword forward. Then he started to move. He swung the blade in a smooth, powerful arc that felt completely natural to him. The light from the sword followed his every motion, flowing around him like a ribbon of pure energy. He laughed, feeling the power surge through the sword. It felt like an extension of his own body, a perfect fit. Gilead and Ciel just stood there, completely stunned. They had never seen anything like it. The patriarch couldn't hide his amazement. He thought to himself that the sword work was beautiful, almost perfect. Ciel was speechless. The boy she knew was suddenly a master swordsman right before her eyes. Meanwhile, in another room, the appraiser Lobarian had arrived. He was there to examine the strange necklace Eugene had found. As Lobarian held the necklace, it began to glow with a strange blue light. It was definitely more than just a simple piece of jewelry. His eyes narrowed. He could feel a powerful spell contained within the small gem. He placed it on the desk, and the gem's glow shifted from blue to a deep, pulsing red. This was no ordinary magic. After a moment, Lobarian looked up, completely baffled. He told the patriarch that there was no magic on the necklace at all. He asked suspiciously if Gilead was absolutely sure it had come from the family's treasure vault. The patriarch confirmed it without a hint of doubt. Lobarian wondered aloud if the boy was trying to pull some kind of trick, but Gilead didn't think so. Asking what reason Eugene would have to lie, he pointed out that if he hadn't allowed Eugene a second choice, the boy would have ended up with nothing. Lobarian had to agree. It was a risky move for a kid to make. He still looked worried. Finally, Lobarian stood up, deciding he needed to check it more carefully. He repeated that there was no magic on it, but because the situation was so strange, he was going to dig deeper. The patriarch was stunned. He asked how Lobarian could possibly find out more. Lobarian explained that he would use a special magic created by Sienna the Wise, one that could read the memories of mana itself. He said that since mana exists in almost everything, he could use his power to see the entire history of the necks. Gilead looked at him with a serious expression and told him to proceed. Lobarian held the necklace in his palm and began the spell. He closed his eyes and focused as a bright blue light surrounded the gem. A vision started to form. Lobarian noted that it was about 100 years old, but seemed completely ordinary. The memory showed a street in the capital. Turns out, the necklace was just bought from some old vendor. Lobarian admitted he couldn't read any more of the necklace's history. He explained that the powerful magic inside the treasure vault must have messed with the mana, blocking his spell. Gilead stared at the necklace. The trail went cold 100 years ago. There was no one left alive who could possibly know where it came from. Lobarian looked at the patriarch and asked him what he was going to do. The patriarch made up his mind. He said if the necklace wasn't magical, he'd just give it to Eugene. After all, the boy wanted it so badly, he was willing to pass up a real treasure for it. Lobarian smiled, pointing out that Gilead seemed to have really taken a liking to the boy. The patriarch just smiled back, his expression saying it all. He placed the necklace down on the table. The investigation was over. Gilead looked out the window. He could see Eugene outside. practicing his mana. He then asked what reason he could possibly have not to like him. Gilead finally spoke up. He told Lobarian he was going to make the offer. Lobarian's eyes widened. She stammered, asking if he really meant that offer. The patriarch smiled. He was going to adopt Eugene Lionheart. He was going to make the boy his own son. But Eugene had no idea. He was just outside, completely lost in his training. A man with a friendly smile suddenly appeared, waving hello. The maid next to Eugene gasped. She recognized the man immediately. It was Sir Jian. Eugene's eyes narrowed. He knew that name. Jian Lionheart. This was no ordinary family member. Jian was the youngest brother of the patriarch himself. He was known for being a bit strange, never marrying, and instead joining his brother on his journeys. Eugene stepped forward and introduced himself, making it clear he knew exactly who he was talking to. Jian's face lit up. He grabbed Eugene excitedly, recognizing him as the kid from the collateral family who had won the ceremony. Eugene pushed his hand away, annoyed. He cut straight to the chase and asked if Jian was there to take him somewhere. Jian confirmed it. He explained that the patriarch had planned to send a different knight, but he had decided to come himself. He wanted to meet Eugene personally. Jian explained that he really wanted to see Eugene for himself. He admitted he'd heard a lot about him, but wasn't able to actually watch the ceremony. Turns out, there's a strict tradition that only the head of the family can watch the ceremony. Sir Liberian was just there to help out. He quickly clarified that he wasn't mad about the rule. He was just explaining how things worked. He wondered if he sounded like he was complaining, but then just shrugged it off. He said he didn't care about the rules anyway, and he was sure his brother, the patriarch, didn't care about that kind of stuff either. Eugene listened, thinking about Jian's personality. The guy was clearly a free spirit. Eugene figured that was probably why he'd never gotten married. Jian led him through the main house. The place was huge. As they walked, Eugene asked why the family head had called for him. Jian just shrugged, guessing it was probably to congratulate him for winning the ceremony. Eugene told him he'd already heard his praises. He pointed out that it seemed like Jian didn't know the real reason for the meeting either. Jian smiled. He admitted he had a pretty good idea what it was about, but that it wasn't really his business to care. He stopped walking for a moment. Then he looked at Eugene and said that whatever the reason, it would be great to see him more often. Eugene smiled back and agreed. They finally reached the door. Eugene knocked and announced his name. A voice from inside told him to enter. He took a breath, ready for whatever was coming. Jian opened the large, heavy door for him. He gave Eugene a quick wink before sending him inside. Eugene thought to himself that while Jian was a good guy, he could be a little much sometimes. He stepped into a huge office. Standing by the window was the head of the family, Gilead Lionheart. The patriarch apologized for calling him in so suddenly and told him to have a seat. Eugene sat down across from him at a small table. Gilead got straight to the point. He placed the red necklace on the table between them. He explained that he'd had Sir Lobarian check it out. Turns out, it was just a normal, everyday necklace with no magic at all. Eugene looked skeptical. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Gilead explained that they had even read the memory of the mana inside the necklace, but found nothing strange. Eugene's eyes widened. He knew that magic. It was a spell created by his old companion, Sienna the Wise. He remembered her showing it to him centuries ago. Back in the present, Eugene leaned forward and asked what the memory showed. Gilead told him the memory was of the necklace being sold on a street in the capital about 100 years ago. Eugene grabbed the necklace, his mind racing. That was impossible. He knew this was his necklace from 300 years ago. He wore it for decades. There was no way he was mistaken. He knew Sir Liberian had no reason to lie. That left only one possibility. Did he somehow read the memory wrong? He realized what must have happened. Someone with incredible power had used magic to hide the necklace's true history. He couldn't help but wonder. Was it vermouth? He sat there in silence, weighing his options. He knew he couldn't prove anything right now, but that didn't matter. He had to get that necklace back. So he put on his best kid face and asked hopefully if he could keep it. Gilead smiled, holding out the necklace. He told Eugene that a promise was a promise, and he could have it. Eugene beamed and quickly thanked him, taking the necklace from the table. He didn't waste a second, immediately putting the familiar necklace around his neck. But then, Gilead's tone changed. He explained that the necklace wasn't the only reason he'd called him. There was something else he needed to discuss. Gilead told him the offer might seem sudden, but it was for his future. Eugene's mind started racing. What could he possibly be offering? Gilead leaned forward, his hands clasped together. He looked Eugene straight in the eye and began to ask, but Eugene immediately jumped to the wrong conclusion. He quickly said that while Ciel was kind, he had no interest in getting married right now. Suddenly, it all made sense in his head. Ciel had been so friendly, even after he humiliated her brother. He figured it must have all been a setup. He glared at the patriarch. He'd thought Gilead was a decent guy, but now he saw him as just another schemer. He tried to let him down easy, explaining that he was too young and would need his father's permission anyway. But then, he paused. Gilead quickly cut him off, telling him he had it all wrong. He wasn't trying to marry him to Ciel. Eugene just stared, completely frozen. He had been so sure. Then, a deep blush spread across his face. He was so embarrassed he could barely think straight. He couldn't believe he'd been thinking about marriage to a 13-year-old. He felt like a complete idiot. He wondered if being in a kid's body was making his brain go soft. If it wasn't marriage, then what was this all about? Gilead finally revealed the real reason he'd called him. He wanted to adopt Eugene and make him his son. Eugene's mind went blank. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. The shock quickly turned into calculation. He realized this was a clever way to tie him permanently to the main family, an adopted son. The idea was just too sudden for him to process. Seeing how flustered Eugene was, Gilead admitted the whole marriage talk had been his mistake. Then he sweetened the deal. He said if Eugene agreed, his father, Gerhard, would also be brought to the main family. Eugene looked down, trying to make sense of it all. He pointed out that this would mean he'd have 2 fathers. Gilead told him not to worry about that. This wasn't about replacing anyone. It was about his whole family joining the main branch. He explained that he was already a father of 3. He wasn't trying to take Gerhard's son away from him. He hadn't even met Gerhard yet, but he promised to treat him with the respect of a brother. Eugene listened silently. The offer was huge, and it wasn't just about him anymore. It was about his father's future, too. Eugene looked up, his expression serious. He had to know one thing. He asked if Gilead would stop respecting his real father if he refused the offer. Gilead just smiled. He told him, of course not. Then he stood up from his chair, his gaze still on Eugene. He admitted it was a little embarrassing to say out loud, but he promised he wasn't that petty. He explained that if Eugene refused, he'd be disappointed, but that's all. Gilead promised to respect his choice and would wish him the best for his future, no matter what. That was all Eugene needed to hear. He told Gilead he couldn't decide on his own. He wanted to speak with his father first. Gilead agreed without hesitation. He said they would push back the banquet, and he'd send people to bring Eugene's father from Gidal. Eugene quietly thanked him. Eugene took a quiet sip, his mind still working. There was one more thing he needed to understand. He looked at Gilead and brought up something the patriarch had said earlier. He asked what exactly he meant when he said this was all for his future. Gilead smiled, explaining that living in the main house would open up countless opportunities for him. For starters, he'd have access to some of the best knights in the world for advice and training. But Eugene wasn't interested in just any knight. He said if he was going to learn from someone, it had to be the best. He looked Gilead straight in the eye and asked a bold question. If he became his son, would the patriarch himself train him? Gilead listened, his expression unreadable, as he considered the boy's request. Eugene smirked. He was genuinely curious just how strong the head of the Lionhearts really was. A slow smile spread across Gilead's face. He agreed, of course, but he told Eugene that if he really wanted to learn from the best, there was someone else better suited for the job. Eugene was confused. He asked who he was talking about. The patriarch revealed the name, Jian. He admitted that while he used to be stronger, Jian had now surpassed him. Eugene's mind flashed back to Jian. He remembered that cheerful, almost goofy guy. He couldn't believe he was supposed to be the strongest. Gilead changed the subject. He asked if Eugene had received the method of mana training from his father yet. Eugene confirmed he had the training method, but said he hadn't looked at it. He explained with a grin that he was afraid he might accidentally learn it just by knowing what it was. Gilead seemed impressed. He figured Eugene must have always been a serious student, even before coming to the main estate. He then started to explain something called a mana stone. It's a crystal full of mana that comes from powerful monsters, and it's often used to help beginners learn. But there was a problem. The stones were expensive, hard to get, and you needed an experienced teacher to help you use them right. Gilead knew that for Eugene's family, getting all of that would have been impossible. The place where Eugene grew up was completely holding back his true potential. Gilead stopped himself. He realized he shouldn't say all this directly to Eugene, worried it might make the boy resent his own family. This was something he needed to discuss with Gerhard instead. With the talk of mana training finished, Gilead leaned forward. He said there was something else he wanted to discuss with Eugene. Eugene just smiled and agreed, taking another sip of his tea. They sat there for a while longer, just the two of them, in that huge, quiet room. By the time they were done, the tea was gone and the desserts were untouched. Eugene stood up to leave. Gilead told him to wait, offering to call someone to show him the way back. But Eugene just shook his head with a grin. He said it was fine. He'd just treat it like a stroll. He walked alone down the long, empty hall of the main estate. As he moved, he felt a strange energy tingling around him. Something was nearby. Suddenly, he caught the strong scent of perfume in the air. He realized someone was standing just around the corner, up ahead. They weren't moving at all. It was obvious they were waiting for him. He walked down the hall to see who it was. As he got closer, he saw the edge of an elegant dress. He rounded the corner and found himself standing right in front of her. She put a hand to her mouth and acted surprised, calling out his name as if it were a total coincidence. But Eugene knew better. She had been waiting for him the whole time. He decided to play along with her little game. He was completely taken by surprise. He quickly composed himself, bowing politely, as he introduced himself as Eugene Lionheart from Gidal. The woman smiled. She mentioned hearing that he'd been speaking with her husband and pretended she had no idea he was still around. But Eugene didn't buy it. He cut straight to the point and asked if there was something she needed from him. Her polite smile vanished the moment he wasn't looking. In her mind, she thought he was an arrogant brat, but she had to admit he had a right to be. He was a kid from the countryside who had beaten the main family and won the ceremony. She knew this kid was going to grow into something powerful. It would be much smarter to stay on his good side. She even thought marrying her daughter Ciel to him wouldn't be a bad idea. Turns out, that was the real reason she'd told Ciel to get close to him in the first place. She leaned in with a sly smile and asked what he and her husband had been talking about. Eugene didn't hesitate. He told her flat out that it wasn't something he should be telling her. She laughed nervously, pretending she wasn't trying to pry. Then she quickly changed the subject, saying there was something else she wanted to say. He was completely caught off guard by the sudden shift. She brought up the incident with Cyan, putting on a big show of apologizing for how her son had troubled him. Eugene just told her not to worry about it. He explained that Cyan had already apologized himself. She praised him for being so mature for his age, saying how grateful she was. She finished by saying she'd scolded Cyan firmly and hoped that he and her son would stay good friends. With that, she turned and walked away. He put on a big, friendly smile and said, of course they should get along. After all, they were family. But inside, Anisilla was fuming. She hated that he was technically right. Hearing those words from someone she considered so far beneath her was infuriating. Sensing the mood had soured, Eugene decided it was time to go. He simply asked if he could leave. Her expression changed in an instant. She put on a sweet smile, apologized for keeping him, and told him to go get some rest. He turned and walked away, feeling her eyes on his back the entire time. As he left, he finally placed her, Anisilla, the second wife. He remembered now, she was the one who looked down on his family from the very beginning. He knew right then that she was trouble. He decided he wanted absolutely nothing to do with her. The moment he was gone, her polite smile disappeared. A cold, blue energy started to crackle around her body. She gripped her fan tight. He was gone. Her polite smile disappeared. A cold, blue energy started to crackle around her body. She gripped her fan tightly, her anger finally showing. 2 days later, Eugene's father, Gerhard Lionheart, finally arrived from the distant Geidel province. He stepped out onto the grounds of the main estate. The patriarch, Gelade Lionheart, was there to greet him. Gerhard looked completely overwhelmed, standing next to the head of the family. He still couldn't believe it. He had to ask Gelade if it was true, if Eugene had really been victorious at the ceremony. Tears started to well up in his eyes. His son had actually beaten the children of the main family. He'd always known Eugene was extraordinary, but Gerhard felt like he was holding his son back, that he couldn't give him the support he truly deserved. He had expected Eugene to be humbled. He thought the ceremony would teach his son a harsh lesson, that the gap between their families was just too wide to cross. That's what he had believed, but he was wrong. Then, Gerhard heard a voice call out to him. He looked up and saw Eugene waving from across the courtyard, standing right next to the patriarch. Gerhard called out his name, and Eugene's face lit up with a huge smile. Without a second of hesitation, Gerhard ran. He grabbed his son and pulled him into a powerful hug. Gelade watched the emotional reunion with a small smile. Tears streamed down Gerhard's face as he told Eugene how incredibly proud he was. Eugene just grinned. He reminded his father that he'd promised to send good news, and playfully asked if he'd actually doubted him. Gerhard apologized. His voice choked with emotion. He admitted that he hadn't trusted his son enough. The patriarch, Gelade, watched the two of them, his expression unreadable. That's when Gerhard finally seemed to realize who was standing there. He quickly bowed and introduced himself, apologizing for his late greeting. Gelade simply smiled and introduced himself. He politely apologized for the sudden invitation. Gerhard was completely flustered. He shook the patriarch's hand and insisted that he was just grateful to have been invited at all. Gelade said he didn't want to interrupt their reunion, but he asked if they would mind coming inside for a conversation. Gerhard eagerly agreed, saying it would be his pleasure. With that settled, Gelade led the way inside. Gerhard followed, glancing back at his son as they walked. The main family's residence was exactly as grand as you'd expect. Inside, Gerhard sat across from Gelade, completely stunned. He stammered, asking if they were really talking about adoption. Gelade calmly took a sip of his tea and confirmed that yes, that's exactly what he was proposing. He explained that if Eugene was adopted, Gerhard himself would also be accepted as a member of the main family. Gerhard's face was full of worry. This was a huge deal, coming completely out of nowhere. Suddenly, Gerhard stood up from his chair. He bowed his head and said that even if it was rude, he had to speak his mind. He told Gelade he was grateful for seeing his son in such a good light. But when he thought about Eugene's future, he couldn't just accept. Gelade listened patiently and asked Gerhard to explain what he meant. Gerhard explained his fear. He was worried that the other members of the main family would treat Eugene badly. He pointed out that the patriarch already had 3 children. If Eugene was adopted, he'd just be stealing the spotlight from them. Gelade nodded, understanding his concerns completely. Gerhard went on, saying he didn't want to limit his son's future, but the main family would never, ever accept a child from a collateral line becoming the head of the family. Gelade placed a reassuring hand on Gerhard's shoulder. He agreed that Eugene could never become the patriarch, but if Eugene wasn't greedy for that title, he could let his talents truly bloom with the full support of the main family. He said he wanted Eugene to become a brother to his own children and build real bonds with them. Those connections could open up huge opportunities for him down the road. Gerhard stood silently for a moment, taking it all in. He finally admitted that Gelade might be right. Gerhard finally made his decision. He told the patriarch he would discuss the matter with his son. Meanwhile, Eugene was out in the training yard, completely absorbed in his sword practice. He wasn't just playing around. His focus was absolute. He moved with a speed and power that was unbelievable for his age. That's when Gerhard came out to the training grounds to find him. Eugene immediately stopped his practice and called out to his father. Gerhard looked at his son, his expression full of worry. Just by looking at his father's face, Eugene could tell something was wrong. He figured the news about the adoption must have come as a huge shock. Seeing the look on his father's face, Eugene asked him what was wrong. Gerhard swallowed hard, his eyes locked on the sword hanging from his son's belt. It was Stormblade Winneth, a treasure that Eugene had personally picked from the main family's vault. Gerhard knew that even if they sold everything they owned, they couldn't afford a single sword like that. He finally got the words out, telling Eugene that the head of the family wanted to adopt him. But Eugene didn't seem surprised at all. He calmly replied that he already knew. Gerhard looked at his son seriously. He said he hoped Eugene would join the main family because it was the best thing for his future. But as he said it, he clenched his fist. He warned Eugene that if he did accept, things were going to get much, much harder. Eugene just shrugged, agreeing that there would definitely be trouble ahead. But he grinned, reminding his father that he'd never been the type to go down without a fight. Gerhard was completely overwhelmed, his voice cracking as he said Eugene's name. He grabbed his son's shoulders, telling him to never forget the name that he and his late mother had given him. Eugene smiled. He promised that even if he became an adopted son of the main family, Gerhard would always be his real father. That was all it took. Gerhard broke down completely, pulling his son into a tight, tearful hug. As his father cried, Eugene was already thinking ahead. He knew the adoption would be annoying, but the rewards were worth it. He had no interest in becoming the head of the Lionheart family. The problem was, he knew nobody else was going to believe that. He knew the patriarch's two wives, Theonis and Anicilia, would have no choice but to be wary of him. He figured there were two ways to handle all the attention and complaints. The first was simple, just ignore it all. Or there was another way. He could just unleash his power. He could draw his blade and face them head on. That second option was much more his style. Crush anyone and anything that got in his way. To mark the occasion, Gilliday, the head of the Lionheart family, invited every kid who participated in the ceremony, along with their families, to a grand ball. It was officially a party to celebrate the victory of a collateral line. This was a polite way to avoid focusing on the main family's humiliation. As soon as they arrived, people started approaching Eugene's father, Gerhard. One of the men praised Eugene's talent, then immediately tried to sell Gerhard on his family's secret muscle growth medicine, something even the main family didn't have. He insisted they meet later to get better acquainted as fellow members of the collateral line. Gerhard looked overwhelmed and just nervously agreed. Eugene watched from a distance. He knew if he went over there, he'd just become the center of attention. He could tell right away that the loud man was Gargus's father. His eyes scanned the room and landed on another group. It was Cyan, standing stiffly next to his mother. The kid looked absolutely miserable. His mother, Ancilla, told him to stand proud. She warned her son that from now on, he was going to be compared to Eugene constantly. She spelled it out for him. People would mock him for losing the duel, and they'd laugh at the main family for losing the ceremony for the first time ever. Cyan didn't say a word. He just looked down, completely ashamed. Ancilla told him he had to feel the embarrassment, but he couldn't fall into despair. She reminded him that no matter what, he was her son and a direct descendant of Lionheart. He quietly agreed. She explained that while Eugene couldn't become the head of the family, Cyan couldn't afford to get lazy. He had to work even harder now to claim his spot. Then she leaned in and gave him a final, shocking order. She told him to become friends with Eugene. She told Cyan that since they were brothers now, he needed to become good friends with Eugene. That way, one day, Eugene would help him. Cyan quietly agreed, but the thought of being friends with the guy who just humiliated him was a lot to take in. He had no idea how to even start. How was he supposed to befriend someone like that? Meanwhile, Eugene's new sister, Ciel, was much more direct. She found him and pointed out that they were officially siblings now. She followed after him, playfully asking if he could call her Big Sis. Eugene was not having it. He argued that she was only a few months older. Ciel complained that she got stuck being the little sister to her own twin just because he was born 5 seconds earlier. She insisted this was different and begged him to just say it once, claiming it wasn't a big deal. Eugene just smirked to himself. The idea of calling this 13-year-old kid Big Sis was just ridiculous. He flat out refused, telling her he'd rather die than call her Big Sis. Meanwhile, in another part of the estate, a man in a red cloak was laying down some ground rules. He stated that he couldn't guarantee he'd take someone on as his student. Turns out, this was the Tower Master of the Red Magic Tower, which specialized in summoning magic. He was there to discuss the future of the young master, Iode, who would first have to pass an aptitude test. Iode nervously asked what would happen if he actually had the talent for it. The Tower Master told him that while that would be good news, it wasn't enough. In the world of magic, the Lionheart name didn't matter. Unless his talent was truly overwhelming, he wouldn't be accepted as a student. Iode looked down, understanding the difficult road ahead of him, but the Tower Master softened his tone. He explained that he was a longtime friend of the Patriarch, Gilead, and because of that, Iode would be given plenty of chances. He promised to protect him from any talk of favoritism and create an environment where he could train in whatever magic fit him best. Iode's heart pounded in his chest. He didn't even care about becoming a disciple. This was his chance to finally get away from his suffocating family and learn magic. He looked over at his father, Gilead, who had been listening the whole time. The Patriarch smiled. He told his son not to worry about what anyone else thought and to just pick his own fate. Iode was stunned. He hadn't expected his father to be so supportive. But then his mother, Tanis, stepped forward, calling his name sharply. She told him to accept the opportunity, since he'd always been more interested in magic than the sword anyway. Then she grabbed his shoulder, her grip tight. Her friendly tone was gone. She leaned in close, her voice a low whisper. She reminded him that he was her son, the one destined to lead the main family, and he better not forget it. Gilead had seen enough. He called out her name, Theonis, his voice sharp and angry. She just brushed it off, claiming she was only giving her son some motherly encouragement. But Iode just stood there, completely stunned. But inside, her mind was racing. She could already picture her rival, Ancilla, jumping for joy that Iode was being sent away. She knew this was a setback, but she felt like she had no other choice. The truth was, she knew Iode wasn't born with the talent of a Lionheart. He was weak, and he was naive. So this was her strategy. By sending him to Aroth, he could get stronger and build connections with powerful magicians to support him later. She looked him in the eye one last time. She reminded him of who he was, a true son of the Lionheart family. Iode looked down, clearly unhappy with his mother's plan, but he agreed to it anyway. Night turned into morning. The day after the ball, everyone started to leave. Yodi and a man named Loberian were the first to go, heading off to Arath. Soon after, all the other collateral families packed up and went home too. That meant the massive guest house was now all for Eugene and his father. Gerhard seemed to be enjoying the new lifestyle. With the estate quiet, it was finally time for Eugene to begin his real training. This would be the first time he'd learn about mana since being reborn. There are basically two ways to develop mana, through special breathing exercises or through intense physical training. The first lesson was about the two ways to gather mana. You could do it through intense physical training, or you could do it through special breathing exercises. Both were hard, but breathing was way more effective. In his past life, Eugene had started with physical training, but he remembered Sienna and Vermouth convincing him to switch to breathing. Their advice had changed everything for him back then, and just as he expected, the Lionhearts trained their mana through breathing. When it was time to start, he found someone waiting for him by a tree. It was Cyan. Cyan smiled, telling Eugene that he was here and that it was time to go. He led Eugene deep into the forest to a place known as a spirit vein. It was a special area where mana naturally gathered in huge amounts. Turns out, this spirit vein was man-made, created by Vermouth himself 300 years ago. It was a secret place that only direct descendants of the main family were allowed to enter. Eugene couldn't help but be impressed. To create something like this, Vermouth truly was a monster. Cyan glanced back at him with a grin and asked if he was nervous. Eugene just grinned back, telling him he was excited. Cyan warned him that it wouldn't be easy. He explained that feeling mana is easier for younger kids, so it would be tough for Eugene since he was just starting. He gave some examples. It took him and his twin sister 4 days when they were 6. Their older brother, Yod, took about a week. He pointed out that kids from the collateral lines usually take about a month just to get a feel for it, but he smiled, saying he didn't think it would take Eugene that long. After all, he had the spirit vein and Cyan's personal help. He asked Eugene how many days he thought it would take, then guessed maybe 10. Eugene just smiled. 10 days? He thought that was ridiculous. He grinned, telling Cyan it wouldn't even take him 10 minutes. Cyan led him deep into the forest, stopping in front of a small cabin. This was the location of the spirit vein, a place created by the great Vermouth himself. It was time to see if Eugene could actually back up his words. Sunlight poured through the trees onto the lonely cabin roof, making the hidden training ground feel almost sacred. Cyan pushed the door open and stepped inside first, while Eugene followed, eyes adjusting as the bright forest light faded into the plain wooden room. With a confident grin, Cyan pointed deeper into the cabin, telling Eugene to follow him to the real training spot. They headed down the stone steps, Cyan walking like he knew every inch of this place, while Eugene followed into the growing dark. At the bottom, the cramped stairs opened into a vast round hall, its floor carved with shining golden lines that marked the spirit vein Vermouth had built. Cyan pointed toward the center of the pattern, telling Eugene to take his place right there where the mana was thickest. Eugene stepped into the middle and dropped to one knee on the golden emblem, calmly settling his hand on the cold floor as if claiming the place for himself. Once Eugene sat cross-legged in the center, Cyan explained that the mana training method of the main family came straight from their ancestor, the great Vermouth, and that this place was built for that very purpose. Cyan calmly explains that the side branches are banned from learning the real method, so they make do with a weaker copy called the Red Flame method. The young heir lets mana rise around his hand and tells Eugene that what he is about to learn is the original method, kept only for the main family. Mana explodes out of Cyan like a pillar of white fire, filling the hall with roaring light. Wrapped in blazing white mana, Cyan grins and tells Eugene that this is the White Flame method. Eugene stares at the flames, stunned. He might not remember what it was called, but that strange shape of mana is burned into his memory. In his mind, Vermouth appears again, his body wrapped in such dense mana that it turns into white flames flowing around him like a lion's mane. Eugene shuts his eyes and thinks back to every fight, knowing that in his last life, he never managed to surpass that white flame. With white flames still curling off his body, Cyan tells Eugene that sensing mana will come later and orders him to begin with simple breathing exercises. Eugene suddenly says he can already feel mana, and Cyan stares down at him, not sure if the kid is serious or just full of himself. Cyan smiles and calmly tells Eugene that beginners often fool themselves, saying that if you focus too hard, you can think you feel something that is not really there. The older boy gathers a tiny blue flame of mana on his fingertip, planning to use it as a clear example to show Eugene that what he felt was only in his head. Cyan lowers his glowing finger and lets the blue mana drift in a slow loop around Eugene, turning the quiet room into a moving test field. Seeing no reaction, Cyan smirks and starts to point out that Eugene still cannot sense anything at all. Eugene, still sitting with his eyes shut, lifts a finger to the side of his head and calmly states that mana is gathering right there. Eugene keeps pointing as the blue trail slides around Cyan's body, calmly describing each shift from spot to spot, up and then back down, while Cyan starts to look rattled. With a bright ball of mana now resting on his own fingertip, Eugene grins up at Cyan and asks how long this little test is supposed to last. Cyan just stares at Eugene, stunned that the kid really sensed mana already. He mutters that even 10 days would be amazing, so this speed is flat out insane. The older boy lets out a shaky laugh and rubs his forehead, trying to act like this is no big deal, even though Eugene just crushed all his expectations. Cyan steps forward and kneels in front of Eugene on the glowing pattern. The older boy lets out a shaky laugh and rubs his forehead, trying to act like this is no big deal, even though Eugene just crushed all his expectations. Cyan steps forward and kneels in front of Eugene on the glowing pattern, dropping the little game and getting ready to start real mana training. Seeing there is no point in waiting, Cyan tells Eugene they will start at once and that from now on, he has to stay quiet and focus only on what is happening inside his own body. Eugene closes his eyes, answers without fuss, and lets his face relax as he prepares to dive fully into the training. Sitting cross-legged on the golden pattern, Cyan takes Eugene's hands and tells him to breathe deep, syncing their rhythm as the lesson truly begins. Eugene draws in a long breath and a soft blue glow rises from his body, the mana he is pulling in flowing through his lungs and down into their joined hands. Inside his mind, Eugene pictures himself breathing in mana along with the air, letting the bright streams pour through his chest. He follows Cyan's teaching and guides that flow along the paths of the white flame method, drawing all that warmth toward his heart until it gathers there like a burning core. Their hands hover close, blue light wrapping around Eugene's small fingers as the mana he drew in starts to pass between them in a steady flow. Cyan leans in, shocked by how strong the blue flames around Eugene have grown, but he forces his voice to stay calm as he tells the kid he is doing well and to keep going. Eugene sits perfectly still in the center of the pattern, eyes shut and back straight, while the blue fire around him climbs higher with every slow breath. Watching that calm blue glow, Cyan realizes this is way past just doing well. Eugene is already shaping the mana inside his body, something most kids can't even dream of at this stage. The chamber stays silent except for their breathing, Eugene wrapped in blue light on the golden pattern, while Cyan stands off to the side, trying to process how fast this kid is racing ahead. Even while keeping his eyes shut, Eugene can't help thinking that this pace is crazy, the mana answering him far easier than he had planned for. Drawing in more power, Eugene notes that his old memories make the control simple, but even without them, this Lionheart body drinks in mana so easily that he can feel it piling up inside him every time he breathes. After a few more breaths, Eugene feels strain creeping into his small frame and calmly judges that this is as much mana as this young body can handle for today. Deep inside Eugene's chest, the gathered mana snaps into place, shining like a tiny star as his new core locks in at its limit. Eugene's eyes open, sweat beading as he feels that bright mass sitting heavy inside him, strong enough to strain a grown body, let alone a kid's. The boy forces his breathing to calm, standing straight despite the sweat, quietly testing how far this young Lionheart body can carry that new power. Cyan stares down at Eugene, sweat running down his cheek as he tries to match what he knows about mana training with what this kid just pulled off in minutes. Studying the glow in Eugene's chest, Cyan realizes the core inside him is already huge, the kind of size others only reach after years of steady training from a tiny spark. Cyan lets out a shaky smile, reaching his hand toward the kid and admitting that talent like this is straight up monstrous, even by Lionheart standards. Eugene clasps Cyan's hand with a grin, half teasing as he checks that being called a monster counts as praise, and Cyan laughs it off, admitting it was the highest one he had. With one last look look at the golden pattern under their feet. Cyan tells Eugene they're done for today and waves him along while the boy wipes his mouth and gets ready to step out of the spirit vein with a brand new core inside him. Sunlight poured through the trees, the forest looking calm and bright, as if nothing strange had just happened deep beneath it. As they walked along the forest path, Cyan started explaining that the big gap between the red flame method and the white flame method came from how the core worked, since the red one could only ever form a single core no matter how hard you trained. In Cyan's explanation, the white flame method let a core split once it grew strong enough, turning one bright point into several that filled the body with mana, and those separate cores would echo off each other to boost their strength even more. Cyan said that each divided core was called a star, and that Vermouth, who created the white flame method and founded the Lion Hearts, had reached 10 of them, a level only a tiny handful in the whole family history had ever touched. Bringing it back to himself, Cyan bragged that both he and his older brother had already climbed to 6 stars. He went on to say that Eode, Cyan, and Ciel were sitting at 1 star for now, though he figured the twins would probably push up to 2 stars by next year. Cyan recalled that he and Ciel had first touched mana at 6 years old, and that it had taken them around 8 long years just to move from 1 star to 2. Hearing all that, Eugene blinked and calmly asked how his own core stacked up against theirs. Cyan grinned and said Eugene would race past the others as long as he did not slack off. Eugene laughed and threw up his fists, loudly promising to work hard. Inside, Eugene scoffed at the idea of being lazy, thinking about how this body was miles better than the one he died in, and how he had even grabbed Vermouth's mana method, and he swore he would never let a gift like that go to waste. As he followed Cyan down the path, Eugene wondered if he could ever reach those so-called stars, then decided it did not matter, since he could just pick apart the method while training and change any part that felt wrong. Eugene's eyes shone as he silently thanked Vermouth, already picturing all the crazy things he could pull off later, thanks to the white flame method that had been left behind. Before long, the forest gave way to stone and glass, and the two boys stood once more before the towering Lionheart mansion. Outside the front doors, Cyan told Eugene he would handle talking to his older brother and waved him off, saying today's trip had to have worn him out. Eugene nodded with a relaxed smile, saying he understood and turning toward the mansion, already planning how he would use what he had learned. Eugene watched Cyan leave and brushed off the idea of taking it easy, already planning his next move. His body ached, but Eugene just grinned, sure that one night of sleep would fix it, and eager to test what he could do. Now that he had finally grabbed hold of mana, a young maid, Nina, spotted him and gasped, startled that the young master was already back. Nina hurried over, asking why he had returned so early, and Eugene greeted her by name, acting like he had come back exactly when he meant to. Without wasting time, Eugene told her to fetch Wynneth from his room, already lining up what he needed for his plan. Soon after, Nina stood back with tense hands as Eugene took hold of Wynneth, the worn blade resting in his grip like he was about to push it past its limits. Staring at the blade, Eugene frowned and admitted to himself that trying to form a contract with it might not work at all. Even with that doubt, the boy shut his eyes and drove his fresh mana into Wynneth, blue light bursting along the blade as he forced the contract to happen his way. The young maid froze as a wall of dust rushed toward her, eyes wide as the air itself started to roar. The gale smashed into Nina and hurled her to the ground, ripping at her dress as she screamed and tried to shield her face. A giant pillar of wind twisted up from the courtyard, dragging Nina toward it as the whole mansion shook under the raging storm. At the center of the vortex, Eugene stood with his sword drawn, while a deep voice from the spinning darkness asked if he was truly Hamel. Eugene stared into the storm, and memories from 300 years ago rose up as he realized this voice was one he knew well. His golden eyes burned as he named the presence inside the storm, recognizing it as the elemental spirit king of wind, Tempest. Tempest's voice echoed from the storm. He explained that he thought one of Vermouth's descendants was using the sword, but then he felt Hamel's soul. Eugene's face twisted with anger. He had one question that had haunted him for 300 years. Why didn't Vermouth finish the job? He yelled into the wind, demanding that Tempest tell him everything. The Spirit King had been there. He had to know the truth. The face of the Spirit King something formed in the swirling wind. Tempest confessed he didn't know what Vermouth was thinking, but he revealed something shocking. In the final battle against the Demon King of Incarceration, Vermouth put his sword away. Eugene's eyes went wide. That didn't make any sense. Tempest continued, his voice painting a picture from the past. The battle at the Demon King's castle had been brutal, but it all ended for nothing. In the end, only two were left standing in the ruined throne room, Vermouth and the Demon King of Incarceration. And that's when Vermouth put his sword away. He didn't finish off the Demon King of Incarceration, and he never went to face the final Demon King of Apocalypse. He just stopped. For a moment, Eugene just stood there, his back to everything. The news about Vermouth felt like a physical weight. Then he exploded. He refused to believe it, feeling like the Spirit King was messing with him. He screamed into the storm, demanding to know about the deal Vermouth supposedly made with the Demon King of Incarceration. But Tempest's voice echoed back that he knew nothing about it. Furious, Eugene yelled back, demanding to know what the Spirit King knew at all. Tempest explained that only the people actually present in that room knew the truth. The moment Vermouth put his sword away, the Spirit King was blocked from seeing anything more. That was a dead end. Eugene screamed back that everyone else was unconscious. He couldn't exactly go ask Vermouth's corpse for answers. The Spirit King's voice cut through his anger, warning him that their time was running out. Tempest explained that Eugene shouldn't have been able to summon him in the first place. He had forced the connection open just to meet him, and now that door had to be closed. He screamed into the storm, demanding answers before the Spirit King left. But Tempest's last words echoed back. Call again when he was strong enough. His body was trembling with the effort, but he refused to let it go. Then, just like that, the connection was cut. The energy vanished, and Eugene's body finally gave out, collapsing to the ground. A maid who was nearby saw him fall and rushed over in a panic. She found him completely unconscious, calling out his name in alarm. When he finally came to, he was back in his own bed. His eyes snapped open. He remembered everything that had happened. He shot upright, a sharp pain exploding in his head. The backlash from forcing the summoning was hitting him all at once. He recognized the feeling instantly. Mana exhaustion. He had squeezed out every last drop of power he had, but it was worth it. He remembered that elementals don't see bodies, they see souls, and the Spirit King had called him Hemel. For a long time, a troubling thought had been stuck in his head. What if he wasn't really Hemel, but just some kid whose mind was overwritten with a dead hero's memories? But Tempest's words cleared everything up. A grin spread across his face as he clenched his fist. There was no more doubt. He was Hemel, brought back to life with all his memories from 300 years ago. Just then, the door creaked open. The maid who had found him earlier was peeking in to check on him. Seeing him awake, she hurried over to his bedside and asked if he was all right. He told her he was fine, then immediately asked how long he'd been unconscious. The maid explained he'd been unconscious for about half a day. He just apologized for worrying her. Then she told him he had visitors waiting, the family patriarch and Master Gian. A moment later, the two of them walked in. The head of the family, Gilead, and Gian Lionheart stood by his bed, looking down at him. Gilead got straight to the point. He said he'd heard from Nina that a huge gust of wind appeared when Eugene drew the sword. He looked Eugene right in the eye and asked if he had summoned an elemental. Eugene didn't answer right away. He knew this was a tricky situation. A storm that big would have been seen by a lot of people. He couldn't lie about it, but he couldn't tell them the whole truth either. He had to give them something. So, he decided to tell them a piece of the truth. He looked up at them and admitted that the elemental king of wind had appeared before him. Guyon stared, completely stunned by what Eugene had just said. Gilead, the patriarch, just watched silently. Eugene just smiled. He explained that the elemental king wanted to see who he was, since it had been so long since anyone had called him. Guyon was still trying to wrap his head around it. He pointed out that no one in the family had managed to call the elemental king since the great Vermouth himself. Eugene continued his story, saying the king told him he wasn't strong enough yet. He promised they'd meet again when he'd grown, and then return to the elemental realm. Gilead just started laughing. Guyon, on the other hand, looked like he was about to pass out. The patriarch looked down at Eugene with a huge grin. He admitted that the boy was truly a fascinating child. He went on, saying he'd already heard from Guyon about what happened in the spirit vein, how Eugene had sensed the mana instantly and formed a core with the white flame method. That alone was amazing, but to also attract the attention of the elemental king of wind, that was something else entirely. Eugene couldn't stop smiling. He was just so happy with how things had turned out. Gilead told him to take a few days to rest. After that, Jian would continue his instruction. The patriarch admitted he was planning to leave for his own training, but decided that helping Eugene's talent grow was more important. Eugene was surprised. He thanked them for the offer, but said he didn't want to take time away from their own training. Jian shook his head, telling Eugene not to think of it like that. He insisted that he really wanted to be his teacher. He then added that he'd also be teaching Cyan and Ciel, and that the patriarch would be helping out too. Gilead's expression grew thoughtful as he considered his other two children. He hoped that seeing Eugene would be a good source of inspiration for them. Meanwhile, Ciel was talking to her brother about Eugene. She brought up the fact that he'd already reached 1 star in the white flame method. Cyan already knew, and he didn't sound happy about it. She complained that it took them forever to reach that level. Cyan shot back that a month was actually considered one of the fastest times in the family's history, but that didn't matter. Eugene had reached 1 star in a single day. Fueled by this, they both poured their energy into their practice. Their swords met with a flash of light. While they were busy training, Eugene was just waking up in his room. He sat up and looked around, checking to see if everyone was gone. Once he was sure he was alone, he grabbed a training sword. He stood in the middle of the room, getting ready. He focused his mana, and a blue light began to swirl around the blade. With a swing, a small, glowing spirit appeared in the air. He recognized it as a sylph, a low-level elemental. With the small amount of mana he had, this was the best he could do, but he hadn't just summoned it for practice. He tried asking if it had heard anything from its king. The little spirit just floated there, its eyes completely blank. He sighed. Turns out, he couldn't have a real conversation with an elemental that had such low intelligence. He gave the sylph a message for its king. He told it to warn Tempest that if he had lied, he would personally hunt him down. The little spirit seemed to understand the weight of his words. With the message sent, he dismissed the elemental. It vanished, leaving him alone in the room with his thoughts. His mind went back 300 years. He remembered it clearly. He was the only one who died at the Demon King's castle. The other 4, including Vermouth, all made it out alive. He sat down, the weight of it all hitting him. The only ones who knew what really happened in that deal were Vermouth and the Demon King himself. He knew what he had to do. Someday, he would have to go to Helmuth, the land of the demons. But not just there. He wanted to find out what happened to his old comrades. He thought of the mage in Aroth, the holy woman in Eurus, and the warrior in Luhar. He looked down at his hand. He knew he couldn't go to those places yet. His new body was still too young to handle a journey that far, but he made a promise to himself. Someday, he would. He clenched his fist, his eyes burning with a new fire. He would get stronger, no matter what it took. He woke up with a new sense of purpose. The years of training had definitely paid off. Just like that, time flew by. Eugene was now 17 years old. He looked at himself in the mirror, pretty happy with the results. After all, he'd trained his mana every single day without fail. Because of that, he'd already hit 3 stars in the white flame method. But as he stared at his reflection, he knew it wasn't enough. Not even close. This new body was a gift. To truly use its power, he'd have to learn things he never even knew in his past life. His days of just training in his room were over. It was time to make a move. He announced his next move. He was going to Aroth to learn magic. Cyan was completely floored. He demanded to know what on earth he was talking about. Eugene explained that it all started that morning, during his usual white flame training. Cyan's eyes widened. He couldn't believe what he was hearing, but Eugene just grinned. He told him he'd finally done it. He showed him the 3 stars of his mana, spinning in perfect balance. Then, he let his power explode outwards. The blue aura was immense. Cyan could only stare up from the ground, completely speechless. His brother had reached a level he couldn't even imagine touching. Cyan was completely stunned. He couldn't wrap his head around how this was even possible. He realized Eugene had started training with mana 7 years later than him, yet had already reached 3 stars. Cyan himself was still stuck at 2. Eugene just stood there, looking incredibly pleased with himself. He figured it all made sense. He was just a genius. Cyan was so furious he yelled that he wanted to take him out, telling him he couldn't treat his brother like that. He complained that Eugene Eugene beat him up every single morning during their training. Eugene just smirked. He pointed out that Cyan was the one who asked to spar every morning. If he didn't want to, he should just stop asking. Cyan couldn't say anything back. He knew Eugene was right. Changing the subject, Cyan suddenly asked why he was talking about learning magic. He reminded Eugene what happened with their brother Eward. Cyan kept going, reminding Eugene what happened to Eward. He went to Arath to learn magic, but his talent just wasn't good enough to become a disciple of Sir Loberian. He explained that even though Eward used family connections to get into the Red Tower, he never achieved anything important. 4 years later, he's still just mooching off the tower. Suddenly, Eugene's whole vibe changed. He looked absolutely furious. Cyan flinched, yelling that he shouldn't talk about their brother that way, then stammered, asking if he'd said something wrong. Cyan told him not to act like such a know-it-all. He was clearly trying to find a reason for him to stay, and he struggled to get the words out. He finally said it. If Eugene goes to Arath, CL will be sad. Eugene just grinned, completely unfazed. He asked if he meant the same CL, who barely spoke to anyone, and always trained by herself until just recently. With a casual wave, he said something and turned to leave. The conversation was over. Cyan called out, asking where he was going. Without looking back, Eugene told him he was going to meet with the head of the family. He decided that while he was reporting his new 3-star status, he might as well get permission early. It was the perfect time to ask. He left Cyan standing there and walked straight towards the main building. Left alone, Cyan kicked his sword in frustration. He couldn't understand why Eugene wanted to learn magic, wondering why he was always acting up. Inside, the head of the family looked at Eugene with a serious expression. He asked if he really meant what he'd said. Eugene stood his ground. He confirmed that yes, he wanted to go to Arath and learn magic. The family head didn't get it. He pointed out that no one in history had reached the 3rd star at his age. If he just kept training, he could easily reach the 4th star before becoming an adult. But Eugene explained that after reaching the 3rd star, he realized something. He felt that if he just stayed in the main house doing the same things, he wouldn't be able to grow any further. Eugene continued, explaining that he wanted to learn more than just what the family could teach him. He argued that even if he wasn't good at magic, it would give him a totally new way of looking at mana. He was certain that learning something completely new would be a great experience for him, and that it would absolutely be worth it in the long run. With his case made, he bowed low, formally asking the family head to approve his request. The family head was clearly taken aback. He hadn't expected such a passionate and well-thought-out argument. He fell silent for a moment, his eyes filled with a deep, serious look as he thought it over. Finally, the family head told him to raise his head. Eugene looked up, waiting for the decision. A warm smile spread across his face. He told Eugene that as the head of the family, he couldn't possibly stand in the way of such a strong desire to learn. He understood, but his expression turned serious again. He had one condition. Eugene had to promise him that he would never, ever get involved with black magic. The family head started to explain. He said that Arath has a black tower where black magicians gather, but unlike in the past, they aren't considered that dangerous anymore. But he reminded Eugene that the Lionhearts are descendants of the Great Vermouth. Because of that, they have an unwritten law to always stand against black magic. Eugene's expression was grim. He knew better than anyone what disgusting things the Demon Kings and their followers did 300 years ago. He looked up and told the family head not to worry about it. A sharp grin spread across his face. He promised that he hated black magic just as much as they did. With the matter settled, Eugene left the room and walked down the grand hallway. But before he got far, he heard a knock and stopped. A voice from behind a set of huge doors asked to talk with him for a minute. Eugene called out, telling the person to come out if they wanted to talk. From behind the door, CL's voice replied that she didn't want to because she was sweaty from training. She then asked him directly if he was really going to Arath. Eugene figured Cyan must have told her. She confirmed it, adding that she also heard he'd already reached the 3rd star of the White Flame method. She asked him why he was going, and he simply said he wanted to learn magic. CL argued that he didn't need to go all the way to Arath for that, since they could just hire a magician from the capital. She then tried to appeal to his ego, saying that while he was away, she and Cyan could finally catch up to his skill level. But Eugene just smiled. He told her that would be a good thing, since it would make sparring with them more entertaining when he got back. He then added that it had been a while since they'd sparred. CL was silent for a moment. Then she asked him a serious question. If she started sparring with him again, again, would he agree not to go to Arath. But Eugene's mind was made up. He told her he was still going. From the other side of the door, Ciel just called him awful. She sounded defeated. She asked how long he would be gone. He admitted he wasn't sure, but it would be a few years at least. A few years was too long. She asked why he had to be gone for so many, admitting that it was really hard when he wasn't around. Ciel tried a different approach, asking him what would happen to his father, Sir Gerhard. Eugene just smiled. He assured her his father would be fine without him. He explained that Gerhard had gotten used to life in the main house and was losing weight from all the hunting he was doing. She then mentioned that Uncle Guion would be sad. Eugene's voice from behind the door agreed that he probably would be. As a final attempt, she brought up her brother. She told Eugene that when Cyan was talking about it earlier, she could tell he didn't want him to go either. Eugene seemed surprised to hear that, but it didn't change a thing. He simply said he was still going to go. From behind the door, Eugene's only advice was to train diligently. That was all he had to say. She heard his footsteps moving away. He didn't even turn around. Ciel just watched him walk down the long, empty hall. She called out one last time, asking if he was really going. Without stopping, he just gave a small wave. Her face fell. She whispered to herself that he was awful. She finally admitted it. It wasn't just Cyan. She didn't want him to go either, but he was already gone. Time passed, and soon, Eugene was preparing for his journey to the magic kingdom of Arath. He went to say goodbye to his father. His father gave him some classic advice: stay out of trouble and focus on his studies while he was away. Eugene just grinned and told his father not to slack off on his own training while he was gone. His dad laughed and stood up, surprised to see that Eugene was now taller than him. Eugene just smiled back. He was ready for this. His father looked at him with pride and wished him a safe journey. The whole family gathered to see him off. He stood alone in front of the massive warp gate, ready to leave. Watching from the side, Gilead, the family's patriarch, wondered if Eugene would really be okay without any guards. But Eugene was confident he could handle himself. He told them not to worry. He was more than confident he could protect himself. Gilead knew he was right. Eugene had already reached the 3rd star in the White Flame method. He was nothing like his other son, Iode. The rest of the family watched on, but while they all had their own feelings about it, Eugene's father was already starting to get emotional. Eugene just stood there, watching his dad start to break down. His father completely lost it, crying and calling out his name. Eugene sighed, asking him why he was acting like this right at the very end. He told his dad that crying wouldn't change anything, since he was leaving no matter what. He asked if he could at least send him off with a smile. His dad tried to wipe away the tears, but he couldn't stop. But he tried. Through the tears, he forced a smile for his son. With a small, confident smile, Eugene turned to leave. He didn't hesitate, walking straight towards the shimmering blue gate. Without looking back, he made a simple promise that he would return. And just like that, he arrived in Pentagon, the capital of the magic kingdom, Arath. The city was incredible, with 5 magic towers forming a star around the central palace. He traveled through the city in a flying carriage, looking down at the streets below. He remembered coming to Arath in his past life. Turns out, the city had changed a lot in 300 years. The most impressive thing was the floating station. Arath was the only magic kingdom with a warp gate right in the sky, held up by powerful spells. The driver looked over at him, his face full of excitement, and asked if it wasn't the most amazing thing he'd ever seen. The tour guide proudly explained that this whole view was basically a cultural treasure of Arath. He told Eugene that all 15 of the floating stations were created by the wise Sienna. Hearing that, Eugene was genuinely impressed. Looking down at the city below, he asked if the floating carriage was also one of her inventions. The guide confirmed it with a big smile, telling him not to worry. He explained that even though the magic was hundreds of years old, they kept it repaired, so the accident rate was very low. Eugene didn't like the sound of that. Low wasn't 0. Just as the guide was about to list more tourist spots, Eugene held up his hand to stop him. He told the guide that before anything else, he wanted to visit the mansion of the wise Sienna. The guide's face lit up. He called it an excellent choice, explaining that Sienna's mansion, the magic tower, and the night view were the 3 must-see sights in the city. As they made their way through the city, floating carriages drifted through the sky above them. The guide explained that 300 years ago, Lady Sienna Sienna became the youngest tower master in the city's history. She said there's even a bronze statue of her at the Green Magic Tower. She continued, saying the mansion they were headed to was where Sienna stayed until the very end. About 200 years ago, she left a letter saying she was retiring, and then she was just gone. Eugene looked up from his papers, asking if it was true that nobody ever found out where she went. The guide confirmed it. She said that all the mages of Aroth, even Sienna's own students, tried to track her down, but not a single one ever found a trace. She added that the saddest part was that Sienna disappeared on her own birthday. The guide then shared her personal theory. She believed Sienna went to the devildom of Helmuth. Eugene's eyes widened. He immediately asked why she would think that. The guide explained that the year Sienna vanished was the 100th anniversary of her return from the devildom, the day she had to leave Hamel's body behind. The guide believed Sienna left because she was heartbroken and wanted revenge for Hamel. Then she leaned in, sharing a popular story, that Hamel was deeply in love with Sienna and confessed his feelings right before he died. Eugene's face twisted with rage. He suddenly snapped, telling her to stop talking such nonsense. The guide just stared back, completely stunned by his reaction. Realizing he'd said too much, Eugene tried to awkwardly take it back. She laughed nervously, guessing that he just wasn't a fan of the romance between the two heroes. Trying to move on, she mentioned there were other guesses about why Sienna retired. She explained that it was a famous story that Sienna hated black magic and demons, and that she opposed the construction of the Black Magic Tower until the very end. She mentioned another theory, that some radical black magicians who wanted the tower built had Sienna taken out. But Eugene knew better. He shot back that there was no way a simple black magician could ever touch Sienna. The guide agreed, adding that even the Black Magic Tower had strongly denied it at the time. Eugene's mind went to a much darker possibility. A black magician couldn't do it, but what about a demon king? He knew that Helmuth, the demon's land, was backing the Black Magic Tower. From the demon king's point of view, Sienna would have been a huge problem, a big enough problem to want her gone. They rode on, the flying carriages of the city floating above them. But Eugene wasn't looking at the sights. He was thinking about Sienna, wondering what really happened to his old friend. He stood before a massive mansion, Sienna's old home. A huge crowd was gathered out front, some kneeling on the ground. Looking at it all, he couldn't help but wonder if she was really gone. The people in the crowd were praying with everything they had. One man begged to finally pass the Magic Tower test, admitting he'd already failed 5 times. The guide explained that everyone here was a student, hoping to pass the recruitment test for the Magic Towers. But he said most of them couldn't afford to go in. Just to get into the garden cost a few thousand sell, and it was even more to enter the building itself. Eugene didn't get why it was so expensive. The guide just said it's because there were plenty of people who would still pay. Turns out there was a superstition. If you prayed to the portrait of Lady Sienna hanging in the main hall, you were guaranteed to pass the Magic Tower test. With that explained, the guide walked them right up to a guard at the entrance and showed him a card. The guard's eyes went wide in shock. The card had the crest of the Lionheart family. After confirming his identity, the guard quickly opened the doors. The Lionheart name got him in without any trouble. The guide told him he'd wait outside, giving him some space to look around on his own. The doors shut behind him, leaving him completely alone inside. A grin spread across his face. He wasn't here to worship a hero. He looked around the huge, fancy hall, ready to see how his old friend Sienna had lived after he was gone. The place was dead silent. He walked down the long hall, completely alone. He thought about how Sienna had lived in this mansion for 100 years after he was gone. And standing there, a memory suddenly came back to him. A voice from a long, long time ago. It was Sienna. She'd asked him what he was planning to do after the war was over. The question caught Hamel completely by surprise. He asked her why she was bringing it up all of a sudden. She just said they were going through hell at such a young age, and that they deserved to live for themselves once it was all finished. But Hamel didn't have an answer. He told her he'd never really thought about it. Sienna then brought up their friend Milan, who was passed out on the ground. She said that idiot planned on becoming a king. Hamel just laughed. He called Milan an insane bastard and joked that you couldn't become a king just because you wanted to. Sienna just smiled. She said it was fine for Milan to want that because everyone was allowed to dream. Hamel was completely thrown off. He asked her if she was drunk. He told her the whole idea was so embarrassing it was making his hands curl up. That's when Sienna lost it. She yelled that she was being serious for once and demanded to know what he planned to do after the war. But somehow the question got turned back on her. For a second, she was speechless. She hesitated, thinking about her answer. Back in the present, Eugene stared at her portrait as he remembered her answer. She wanted a normal life, just like other people, to get married and have a child. She wanted to live long enough to become a grandma. That's all she ever wanted. He looked up at her portrait, his mind racing. She should have found someone, gotten married, and lived a long, peaceful life. He just couldn't understand why she'd spent 100 years all alone. Overcome with emotion, he reached his hand out toward the painting. But before he could touch it, a guard appeared out of nowhere and told him to stop. Eugene flinched back, annoyed. He was just trying to have a moment. He turned away, telling the guard he wasn't just here to see a painting. He knew there was a huge study hidden underground in the mansion. The inside of the mansion was incredible, like a palace where time had stopped. He made his way down to the study. He was hoping to find some kind of clue she might have left behind among all the magic books. But the guard was right there with him, repeating the same warning not to touch anything. Eugene finally snapped, yelling back that he wasn't touching a thing. Since he wasn't allowed to open any of the books, he figured he'd have to adjust the titles for anything that looked interesting. That's when he remembered the necklace from the treasure vault. It wasn't recorded by the vault's magic, and its memory had been overwritten. It made no sense that he just happened to stumble upon it. A thought hit him. Maybe, just like Tempest, the necklace had reacted to his soul, to Hamel, and revealed itself to him on purpose. He was sure of it now. Someone was messing with his second life. And if that someone was Sienna, then she must have left something behind. A clue, a message, anything. He stood before her portrait again, ready to tear the whole place apart if he had to, but his search turned up nothing. He checked the study, the bedroom, every single room in the mansion, and found absolutely zero. He was completely lost. He had no idea what he was missing or where else to even look. He was done playing games. He decided he was just going to do what he wanted. If Sienna had something to tell him, she needed to do it properly. Otherwise, what was he supposed to do? With that, he turned back towards the portrait. He looked up at the painting and called out to her. Then, with a huge grin, he flipped her off. He told her if she was mad, she should come find him herself. He held the pose for a moment, waiting, but nothing happened. So he turned to leave. As he walked away, he looked back one last time. He added a final condition to his challenge. She should come find him, if she was even still alive. With nothing left to find, he left the mansion and stepped out into the night. The guide was still waiting outside. He greeted Eugene with a big smile, joking that he must have enjoyed himself since he'd been in there until sunset. Eugene tossed him a coin as a tip for waiting so long. The guide asked where he wanted to go next, but Eugene already had a place in mind. He told him to go straight to the Red Magic Tower and that his services wouldn't be needed after that. So they took a flying carriage across the city, heading towards their destination. During the ride, Eugene decided to ask him something. He asked the guide if he knew of someone named Iode Lionheart, explaining that Iode was his older brother. The guide's expression immediately changed. He stammered that every young magician in the city knew that name. Eugene explained that he had some business with the Red Magic Tower and that his brother had been living in this city for 4 years now. So he asked the guide to tell him any rumors he knew about his brother. The guide swallowed hard. Spreading rumors about a Lionheart was a dangerous game. Eugene explained that he hadn't spoken to Iode a single time since being adopted. He just wanted to know a little about him, so he wouldn't make a big mistake when they met. To prove he was serious, he swore on his name that he wouldn't get angry or tell his family anything the guide said. All the guide had to do was tell him what he knew. The guide finally caved, admitting that while he didn't know everything, he had heard a few things. He said there was a rumor that Iode left the magic tower every night to enjoy himself. Eugene thought about it for a moment. Iode was 19 now. For a guy his age, that kind of behavior seemed pretty normal. The guide quickly corrected him. It wasn't just normal entertainment. Eugene didn't understand. The guide finally spit it out. Succubi. Eugene exploded with rage. His brother was an absolute idiot. He grabbed the guide, yelling about how there shouldn't be any succubi here. This wasn't the demon's land. The guide was terrified, begging him to calm down. The guide pointed out the Black Magic Tower. He explained that it wasn't just for humans. Demons were in there too. Eugene couldn't believe it. He asked if his brother was really messing around with succubi from the Black Magic Tower. The guide tried to explain it carefully. It wasn't exactly playing around, but more of a service. He said it was a kind of necessary evil that the city just let happen. The guide explained that the street was famous for its black market, with shops that used succubi as hostesses. He then added added that he'd heard Iode went there a lot. Eugene demanded to know where it was. The guide told him it was Bolero Street, a place that only opened on the night of the full moon. He hadn't planned on having anything to do with Iode. He was just going to keep his distance and focus on his own goals. But this was different. The eldest son of the main Lionheart family, a descendant of Vermouth, was messing around with a demon. The dishonor was unbelievable. The guide begged him to keep it a secret. Eugene snapped back that he'd already sworn on his name. He promised he wouldn't tell anyone, and he definitely wasn't going to talk to his brother about it. Still, he had to calm himself. For now, it was just a rumor. Without proof, he couldn't just go and deal with his brother. He filed the information away. The night of the full moon, Bolero Street. Their carriage continued its flight through the night sky.